the world can wait. For now, just get comfortable, breathe deeply, and let some sleepy history wash over you. You can also let us know in the comments where in the world you currently are and what time it is for you. In the bustling, marble-clad metropolis of ancient Rome, if you wanted to see the city let its proverbial hair down, you'd look no further than its relationship with wine. Romans didn't just drink the stuff, they practically bathed in it. Wine was the social lubricant that fueled many a night of bacchanalian revelry, and it came in a variety that ranged from the nectar of the gods to something you'd hesitate to pour on your houseplants. Let's dive into this intoxicating world where every sip was a statement, both social and economic. At the top of the Roman wine pyramid was Falernian, the celebrity of wines, if you will. Unlike today's celebrity endorsements, which usually involve a catchy jingle and a social media post, Falernian had the endorsement of time. It was aged for 10 to 20 years before it even thought about touching a Roman's lips. This was the drink for the elite, the high rollers of Roman society who could afford its hefty price tag. We're talking up to 4 times the cost of a decent slave. And in case you're wondering, a decent slave would set you back around 500 denarii, so do the math. Falernian was so renowned that even the Roman poet Horace couldn't resist mentioning it in his odes, singing its praises like a bard who'd downed a few too many amphorae. But let's not get carried away by the golden glow of Falernian. Most Romans were far more familiar with what we'd call plonk. This was the everyday wine, the stuff that kept the masses content and the taverns bustling. It was the kind of wine that wouldn't make the history books unless it was for the wrong reasons, like inducing the mother of all hangovers. Cheap and cheerful, it was often a concoction of whatever grapes and water were available, sometimes spiced up with herbs or even seawater to improve, or at least disguise, the flavour. Now, before you get the impression that Romans spent their days in a permanent state of inebriation, it's worth noting that their wine was usually diluted. The standard practice was to mix it with water, sometimes in a ratio as high as 8 parts water to 1 part wine. Imagine ordering a glass at your local wine bar and being handed a watered-down version that makes light beer look like rocket fuel. The purpose was twofold. It made the wine last longer and kept one's faculties intact, which was important when you were at a symposium trying to impress your peers with your knowledge of philosophy or your ability to recite Virgil from memory. But why was wine such a big deal? Well, Rome's climate wasn't exactly conducive to growing the best grapes, so getting your hands on quality wine was a status symbol. It was the ancient equivalent of driving a luxury car or wearing designer clothes. And then there was the social aspect. Drinking wine was a communal activity, a way to bond with others, whether you were a senator debating in the forum or a plebeian downing a cup at the local taberna. Wine was the great equalizer, bringing together the highborn and the lowly in a haze of shared indulgence. Now, you might be thinking, didn't Romans have other drinks? And you'd be right. But truth be told, water was about as appealing as a warm cup of donkey sweat, often brimming with bacteria. Beer was considered barbaric, the kind of thing those uncivilized Germans would drink. So, wine it was, and the Romans embraced it with open arms, or perhaps more accurately, open mouths. It wasn't just a drink, it was a way of life, a cultural cornerstone that spoke volumes about one's place in society. Wine's role in Roman culture went beyond just getting a buzz. It was a tool of diplomacy, a means of sealing alliances and agreements. Imagine a senator inviting a rival over for a lavish banquet, plying him with the best Falernian until they were both so merry they couldn't help but see eye to eye. But let's not pretend it was all sunshine and roses. The dark side of Rome's love affair with wine was the way it exposed societal divides. While the wealthy revelled in amphorae of the finest vintage, the lower classes often made do with leftovers, the dregs, or even vinegared wine, a far cry from the luxurious libations of their social betters. But what about those myths, you ask? The Romans were fond of embellishing their wine tales with a touch of the fantastical. Stories of Bacchus, the god of wine, cavorting with nymphs and turning rivers into wine, were popular fare. Yet, beneath these fables lay the harsh reality. The vineyards of Italy were not endless fountains of ambrosia. They required labour, often from slaves, who toiled under the hot Mediterranean sun to ensure Rome's insatiable appetite for wine was met. So next time you sip your Merlot or Chardonnay, spare a thought for the Romans. They set a lot of trends, concrete roads, aqueducts, gladiatorial combat. but wine was the one that truly captured the essence of their civilization. It was their drink of choice, their cultural badge, and in many ways the liquid foundation of their society. As you savour your modern-day glass, remember that in ancient Rome, to drink was to be Roman, and to be Roman was to drink. If you think the Romans merely sipped their wine in quiet contemplation, think again. Enter the Roman banquet, the ultimate test of one's ability to consume copious amounts of food and wine while maintaining a facade of decorum. These gatherings, known as convivia, were less about sustenance and more about showcasing social standing. Picture a setting where who you know was as important as the vintage of wine you served. It was a stage where political alliances were forged, reputations were made, and, let's face it, more than a few togas were stained with Falunian. The convivium was an event steeped in ritual, and every aspect was meticulously orchestrated. The guest list was a who's who of Roman society, carefully curated to include those whose company could elevate one's social standing or political clout. The hierarchy was clear. The host, or dominus, was the star of the show, while the guests were both audience and co-actors in this elaborate drama. And don't think you could just stroll in without an invitation. Gaining entry to a prestigious banquet was akin to receiving a golden ticket to the social event of the season. Central to the proceedings was the carbiter bibendi, or the master of drinking. This individual had the unenviable task of deciding the evening's drinking rules and ensuring they were followed. Think of them as the Roman version of a modern-day sommelier, but with the power to dictate not just the wine, but how much of it you drank and when. The arbiter had to balance the fine line between indulgence and excess, ensuring that the evening remained a sophisticated affair rather than descending into chaos. It was a role that required diplomacy, a keen understanding of one's guests and, undoubtedly, a liver of steel. But let's not pretend these banquets were all about moderation. The Romans had a word for binge drinking, commissatio. It was practically a sport, with participants judged by their ability to hold their wine. And while the arbiter bibendi might try to keep things civil, the reality was often far messier. Remember, this was a culture that believed in the virtues of in vino veritasque, in wine, truth. Many a senator found himself revealing more than he intended after a few too many cups. It wasn't just the wine that made these banquets infamous. The Romans were known for their extravagant feasts, where the menu could rival that of a Michelin-starred restaurant. Exotic delicacies like peacock tongues, stuffed dormice, and flamingo brains graced the tables, not so much for their taste, but for the bragging rights they conferred. Serving such dishes was a way of signalling wealth and power, a culinary flex that said, "I have the resources to source the most outlandish ingredients." Yet, beneath the opulence lay a darker reality. These feasts were underpinned by a system of inequality that ensured the few could indulge while the many toiled. The labour-intensive preparation of such feasts was often carried out by slaves, whose sweat and skill went unrecognised as their masters revelled in the spotlight. The banquet showcased not just the grandeur of Roman society, but its underlying disparities. And then there was the entertainment. Forget Netflix, Roman banquets came with live performances. Musicians, dancers, and even poets were hired to provide a sensory backdrop to the evening's indulgence. A particularly favoured form of entertainment was the symposiums, where philosophical debates took centre stage. These discussions, often lubricated by wine, were a chance for Rome's intellectual elite to demonstrate their rhetorical prowess. But let's be real, after a few rounds, the line between intellectual discourse and drunken rambling could blur faster than you'd think. Behind the allure of these grand gatherings was a shrewd political tactic. Hosting a successful banquet wasn't just about flaunting wealth. It was a strategic move in the game of Roman politics. Inviting influential figures and treating them to an evening of luxury was a way to secure loyalty, curry favour, and subtly remind everyone of one's power and influence. It was a reminder that in Rome, social capital was as valuable as the real thing. But while the highborn dined in opulence, the everyday Roman was likely dining on far humbler fare. Bread, olives, and cheese were the staples for most, a far cry from the peacock and dormice served at the aristocratic table. Wine, though more accessible, was of a markedly different quality. While the elite sipped on the finest Falernian, the masses made do with whatever was locally available, often diluted to stretch its supply. Yet, the allure of the banquet was undeniable. It was a microcosm of Roman society, a place where the powerful could parade their status and the ambitious could dream of ascent. It was a reminder of the intricate dance of politics and social maneuvering that defined life in ancient Rome, and as the night wore on and the amphorae emptied, the lines between friend and foe, ally and rival, blurred in the flickering candlelight. So, next time you find yourself at a dinner party, spare a thought for the Romans. Their banquets were more than just meals. They were masterclasses in the art of social strategy. As the wine flowed and the rhetoric soared, the foundations of alliances were laid, ambitions were quietly pursued, and the wheels of Roman politics turned ever onward. But don't get too caught up in the romance of it all. Beneath the glamour was a world of complex social dynamics and stark inequalities, a reminder that even in the grandest of settings, the harsh realities of life were never far away. Yet the allure of the banquet was undeniable. It was a microcosm of Roman society, a place where the powerful could parade their status and the ambitious could dream of ascent. But if you think banquets were the pinnacle of Roman revelry, you haven't met Bacchanalia, the wild child of Roman festivals. Forget toga-clad intellectuals debating the finer points of philosophy over diluted wine. Bacchanalia was all about losing your toga and maybe your inhibitions along the way. Now, Bacchanalia wasn't just a party. It was a religious experience, or at least it started that way. Originally, these festivals were a celebration of Bacchus, the Roman god of wine, ecstasy, and all things hedonistic. However, somewhere along the line, things got a little out of hand. Picture a gathering that began with a religious ritual and ended with the kind of debauchery that would make even a frat party look like a knitting circle. The legend of Bacchanalia is 1 part truth, 2 parts embellishment, with a sprinkle of moral panic for good measure. These gatherings were said to involve frenzied dancing, copious amounts of wine, and, according to some rather scandalized Roman senators, activities that would make your grandmother clutch her pearls. But let's not get too carried away. Not every Bacchanalia was a scene out of his Caligula. Many were rather tame, involving nothing more than a few tipsy Romans dancing under the moonlight. So, what's the truth behind the tales of Bacchanalia's excess? Well, the reality is both less and more dramatic than the myths suggest. In 186 BCE, Bacchanalia became the target of a major political crackdown. The Roman Senate, never one to miss a chance to rain on someone's parade, issued a decree known as the Sonatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus. This wasn't just a case of party poopers flexing their muscles. It was a calculated move driven by fear of social unrest and political subversion. The Senate's decree essentially said no more than 5 people can gather for a Bacchanalia at any one time unless authorized by us. Talk about a buzzkill. The official line was that these gatherings threatened public order and moral standards. But let's be real. The Senate was more worried about secret meetings and potential plots against the state than they were about a little too much fun in the moonlight. It was less about saving souls and more about saving their own skin. This decree is one of the earliest examples of government intervention in the private lives of citizens, showcasing Rome's tightrope walk between personal freedom and state control. It was an early lesson in how moral panics could be weaponized for political gain, a tactic that would become all too familiar throughout history. The Bacchanalia crackdown was a classic case of the ruling class using fear to consolidate power, proving that some political plays are as old as time. But why did Bacchanalia become such a lightning rod for controversy? Part of it was the sheer audacity of the events. They were a direct challenge to the rigid social norms of Roman society, where public behavior was carefully orchestrated and tightly controlled. To the conservative elite, Bacchanalia was a terrifying glimpse of a world where order and hierarchy were tossed aside like last night's empty amphorae. The Bacchanalia also highlighted the tension between Rome's traditional values and the seductive allure of new religious practices. As the Roman Empire expanded, it absorbed not just new territories, but new cultures and rituals. Bacchanalia, with its roots in Greek and Etruscan traditions, represented the cultural melting pot that Rome was becoming. To the old guard, this was both a threat and a challenge. How to maintain a cohesive Roman identity while embracing the diversity that came with their growing empire. Ironically, the very attempt to suppress Bacchanalia only added to its mystique. The Senate's heavy-handed tactics turned a series of religious festivals into a symbol of resistance against state control. It was the Streisand effect, ancient Rome edition. By trying to stamp it out, they only made it more compelling. A forbidden fruit is always more tempting after all. Despite the political crackdown, the spirit of Bacchanalia lived on in more subdued and socially acceptable forms. It morphed into something that could be enjoyed without raising the ire of the Senate. Romans, ever the pragmatists, found ways to celebrate Bacchus within the bounds of the law, proving that you can tame the party, but you can't kill the vibe. So, next time you're at a festival, raising a glass to Bacchus, or any deity of your choice, remember the Bacchanalia. It was a reminder of the eternal struggle between freedom and control, the push and pull between conservatism and change. The Romans loved their order, but they also loved their chaos, and Bacchanalia was the perfect embodiment of that duality, a dance between the sacred and the profane, the civilized and the wild. As we leave Bacchanalia behind, consider this. The festival was more than just an ancient rager. It was a mirror reflecting the complexities of Roman society, a society that was both relentlessly disciplined and irrepressibly hedonistic. In the end, Bacchanalia was a testament to the timeless human desire to break free from the shackles of convention, if only for a night. And isn't that something we can all raise a glass to? As we bid adieu to the wild nights of Bacchanalia, let's take a sobering pun intended look at how the average Roman handled their drink. If you're imagining toga-clad citizens staggering home from the taberna after a night of unbridled revelry, you're not entirely off. But the truth is a tad more nuanced and, dare I say, relatable. In the grand theatre of Roman life, wine wasn't just a beverage, it was practically a co-star. It lubricated social interactions, complemented meals, and offered respite after a hard day's labour. For the everyday Roman, drinking wasn't just about getting plastered, it was a delicate balancing act between work and leisure, a skillful dance as much as any bacchanalian romp. Let's start with the basics. The average Roman's day began with a modest breakfast of bread and cheese, washed down with a diluted cup of wine. Yes, they were already hitting the bottle before noon, but remember, this was more about hydration than intoxication. Ancient water supplies could be a microbial minefield, and mixing wine with water was like the original Brita filter. Alcohol killed off the nasties lurking in Rome's otherwise questionable water. As the sun climbed the sky, so did the Romans' appetite for work. The typical Roman workday ran from dawn until roughly midday. After all, who could argue with a siesta when the Mediterranean sun was doing its best impression of an oven? When the workday wound down, that's when Romans started getting serious about their wine. The tabernae, think of them as the Starbucks of the ancient world, but with a lot more fun. Were the social hubs where Romans gathered to unwind. But don't let visions of a bacchanalian free-for-all fool you. Public drunkenness was generally frowned upon. The Romans valued temperantia, temperance, and anyone caught in public, 3 sheets to the wind, risked social ridicule, if not outright censure. Even the legal system had its say. Drunkenness, particularly if it led to disorderly conduct, could land you in hot water, with penalties ranging from fines to public shaming. Now, let's talk economy. Wine wasn't just a social lubricant, it was big business. The Roman wine trade was a sprawling enterprise, with vineyards stretching across the empire. Wine was imported from regions as far-flung as Gaul and Hispania, and it was as integral to the Roman economy as oil is to ours today. The price of wine varied wildly. The lower classes might shell out a single denarius for a jug of the local swill, while the upper crust splurged on Falernian at prices that would make a modern oenophile blanch. Economics aside, drinking habits also exposed the social stratifications of Roman society. The elite could afford to indulge in the finest vintages, their drinking rituals steeped in ceremony and ostentation. Meanwhile, the plebeians, Rome's working class, drank for camaraderie and comfort, their wine often a thin vinegary concoction that bore more resemblance to a modern-day spritzer than a robust Merlot. Despite these differences, wine served as a great equalizer. In the tabernae, the high-born and the humble could, at least in theory, rub shoulders. Of course, reality was a bit more stratified. VIP sections weren't just a modern invention, but the idea was there. Wine offered a rare chance for the classes to mingle, albeit under the watchful eye of the tavern keeper, whose primary job was to ensure the evening didn't devolve into a Roman bar brawl. Speaking of which, The role of the tavernae in Roman life can't be overstated. These establishments were more than just watering holes. They were community centres, gossip mills, and even informal job boards. A Roman might step into a taverna to catch up on the latest scandal, hear a poet declaim, or talk shop with fellow artisans. In a sprawling city like Rome, where your next-door neighbour might be a stranger, the local taverna was a place to forge and maintain connections. But what about the darker side of Roman drinking culture? While the idyllic image of conviviality and camaraderie is appealing, the reality could be much grimmer. Alcohol abuse was as much a part of Roman life as it is today. The playwright Plautus, known for his comedies, often depicted characters who were little more than tipsy buffoons, their antics serving as both entertainment and cautionary tales. And let's not forget the moralists, who were quick to condemn excessive drinking as a gateway to vice and moral decay. The starkest contrast, however, lay in how alcohol was consumed across the social spectrum. For the wealthy, drinking was an art form, a chance to display one's refinement and taste. Their banquets were meticulously planned affairs, each course paired with the finest wines money could buy. The poor, meanwhile, drank for warmth, solace, and sometimes just to get through another day of grueling labour. Despite these disparities, wine remained a cultural cornerstone for all Romans. It was a tool for social bonding, a status symbol, and even a form of resistance against the grind of daily life. And while the average Roman might not have lived in a constant state of inebriation, the spectre of excess was never far away. A reminder that beneath the veneer of civility lay a world of indulgence and escapism. So, as we sip our modern-day vintages, it's worth remembering that the Romans were not so different from us. They too wrestled with the balance between indulgence and restraint, pleasure and consequence. Their love affair with wine was a reflection of their society's complexities, a dance between duty and desire that continues to echo through the ages. And as we explore further, we'll see how this intricate relationship played out against the backdrop of Roman life, revealing a civilization as multifaceted and contradictory as the wine they so cherished. Now, as we swirl our mental goblet and ponder the long-term impact of Rome's drinking culture, it's crucial to recognize how the echoes of their wine-soaked antics had matured over centuries. You see, the Romans didn't just pass down roads and aqueducts. They left us with a legacy of revelry and ritual that still clinks in our glasses today. First, let's tip our hats to the enduring love affair with wine. The Romans were the original wine influencers, setting trends long before Instagram was even a glint in the internet's eye. They turned wine from a mere drink into a social and cultural icon, a tradition that has aged like, well, a fine Falernian. Today, wine remains a universal symbol of celebration and sophistication, an enduring reminder of Rome's penchant for turning indulgence into an art form. Yet, with every toast, there's a shadow lurking in the cellar. The myths of Roman excess. Those tales of toga-clad senators guzzling wine like it was going out of style have also cast a long, intoxicating spell over our cultural psyche. They've seeped into the collective imagination, fueling a fascination with the decadence of ancient times. Think about it. Every time we caricature the past with images of wild feasts and unbridled hedonism, we're sipping from a cup filled with a heady concoction of truth and exaggeration. The reality, as always, is more nuanced. While Romans certainly knew how to party, their drinking culture was also a mirror reflecting the social and economic dynamics of their world. Wine was both a social glue and a status symbol, a bridge between classes and a stark divider. This duality is something that modern societies grapple with too, how alcohol can bring people together yet also highlight inequalities. And let's not forget the Roman penchant for regulation, something that remains eerily relevant. Remember that Senate crackdown on Bacchanalia. It was a textbook case of moral panic used to tighten the reins of control, a move that has been echoed through the ages. From prohibition in the 1920s to modern debates over drinking laws, the dance between freedom and regulation is as old as Dionysus himself. Economically, the Roman wine industry was a powerhouse, much like today's global wine trade. The economics of indulgence, the way Rome's vineyards fueled both local economies and imperial ambitions, offers a lesson in how luxury goods can drive growth. Wine wasn't just a tipple. It was a commodity that rippled through the Roman economy, a precursor to today's multi-billion-dollar industry. But perhaps the most fascinating legacy of Rome's drinking culture is its reflection on human nature. The Romans, with their love of excess and indulgence, remind us that the pursuit of pleasure is a timeless human endeavor. Whether through wine, food, or revelry, the desire to escape the mundane and embrace the extraordinary is a thread that connects us across millennia. As we raise our glasses to the lessons of history, it's clear that the Romans were onto something. Their drinking culture, while not without its pitfalls, was a celebration of life, a testament to the complexities of human society, and a reminder that some things never change. The interplay between indulgence and responsibility, between freedom and restraint, is a dance we've been performing for centuries, and one that will likely continue as long as wine flows and stories of ancient rebels are told. In the end, the Romans' relationship with wine was as multifaceted as the society they built. It was a tool for diplomacy, a symbol of status, and a source of both joy and discord. Their legacy in the realm of alcohol is both a cautionary tale and an ode to the enduring human spirit. A reminder that while civilizations rise and fall, the clink of glasses and the laughter of friends remain eternal. So, as you take your next sip, remember the Romans. Remember their love of life, their penchant for excess, and their complex dance with the vine. And perhaps, in that moment of reflection, you'll find yourself connected to a long line of revelers stretching back to the ancient hills of Italy, where the wine was as potent as the stories it inspired. Cheers to that timeless connection, and may the lessons of the past continue to enrich our present and guide our future. It was a time when the world was a smorgasbord of city-states, each with its own quirks and ambitions, and Samos was no exception. Perched on the Aegean Sea like a jewel in a crown, Samos around 570 BCE was a place of bustling trade and political maneuvering. We're talking about a time when, hey, let's travel for enlightenment wasn't exactly on everyone's to-do list. But then came Pythagoras, destined to become the rock star of mathematics, though his early life was less about triangles and more about trying not to trip over the tangled web of political intrigue in his hometown. Samos wasn't your average sleepy island. It was a vibrant hub, thanks to its strategic location. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a modern-day shipping port, where merchants and sailors swapped goods and stories in equal measure. This bustling atmosphere was ripe for a young mind eager to absorb the world around it. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The island's rulers, the tyrants, were less about democratic ideals and more about keeping power tight in their fists. Polycrates, the most infamous of them all, ruled Samos with a flair for the dramatic and a knack for making enemies. Pythagoras would have grown up in a society where allegiances were as changeable as the Aegean winds. Young Pythagoras, sporting a toga and a thirst for knowledge, probably realized early on that Samos wasn't going to suffice for his intellectual appetite. So, like any ambitious student today, he looked beyond his backyard. But Pythagoras wasn't just heading to the next city over, he had his sights set on Egypt and Babylon. Picture him as one of the original study abroad students, though instead of worrying about exchange rates, he was probably more concerned with the arduous journey and, surviving it. His Egyptian adventure was like an ancient version of a university exchange program, minus the dorms and meal plans. Pythagoras soaked up Egyptian wisdom like a sponge, delving into the mystical and the mathematical. The Egyptians were the original math geeks after all. They had to be. When you're building pyramids, your geometry better be on point. Pythagoras would have learned from priests who were knee-deep in the mysteries of numbers and the cosmos. But let's not get carried away with the idea of him lounging on the Nile, basking in enlightenment. Egypt was also a place of complex social hierarchies and oppressive regimes. The grandeur had a gritty underbelly, much like those stunning pyramids that were built on the backs of labourers. Babylon wasn't exactly a holiday destination either. Known for their astronomical prowess, the Babylonians were the kind of folks who could predict eclipses with chilling accuracy. Pythagoras, with his insatiable curiosity, would have been like a kid in a candy store. But amid the scholarly riches, the reality was a society that valued knowledge as a means to control and predict, not just to understand. So while Pythagoras might have been dazzled by the stars, the Babylonians had their feet firmly on the ground, calculating the practicalities of power. The mythos around Pythagoras often paints him as a mystical figure, a sage who wandered with a knowing smile. But peel back the layers of legend, and you see a man deeply influenced by the places he visited and the people he met. his travels were less of a mystical journey and more of an intellectual scavenger hunt. Yet, the romantic narrative persists because, let's face it, Pythagoras, the mystical traveller, is a lot more alluring than Pythagoras, the studious tourist. In the end, Pythagoras' early life was a tapestry of experiences stitched together by his relentless pursuit of knowledge. The socio-political climate of Samos, with its tyrants and traders, no doubt shaped his worldview. His travels to Egypt and Babylon were not just about collecting mathematical insights, they were about understanding how knowledge could transcend borders, yet be deeply rooted in the realities of power and survival. And so, Pythagoras set the stage for a legacy that would cast a long shadow over the world of numbers and beyond. As Pythagoras returned to Greece, he wasn't just bringing back souvenirs, but a head brimming with ideas that would soon set the Mediterranean world abuzz. He zeroed in on Croton, a city in southern Italy, which would become the launch pad for his grand experiment in communal living. This wasn't just a let's all live together scenario, no. Pythagoras founded what some might call a mathematical utopia, or others might call a cult. It all depends on how you feel about strict dietary laws and living like a monk. Now, let's talk about Croton, our setting. Croton wasn't just any backwater town, it was an affluent city-state with a penchant for athletics and intellectual pursuits. It was the kind of place where the local gossip wasn't about who was courting whom, but which philosopher was making waves. Perfect for Pythagoras, who was itching to make his mark. With its mix of wealth and curiosity, Croton was ripe for transformation. Pythagoras wasn't just inviting people over for a chat about triangles. He was setting up a society with rules that were, let's just say, a bit eccentric. For starters, members of the Pythagorean sect adhered to a strict vegetarian diet, which might sound like a modern health fad, but back then it was downright revolutionary. And it wasn't just about the food. Pythagoras believed in the transmigration of souls, and eating animals was a big no-no, because, in his view, you might be munching on Aunt Edna's latest reincarnation. The sect's rules didn't stop at the dinner table. They practiced communal living, which meant sharing everything from food to philosophical insights, and even, one presumes, the occasional dirty toga. The idea was to live in harmony, both with each other and the cosmos, which Pythagoras believed was deeply mathematical in nature. Math wasn't just a subject, it was a way of life. And speaking of life, they had this rule about never picking up dropped items, as it was seen as a sign of carelessness. So, if you dropped your abacus, tough luck, better let it lie. Underneath these peculiarities lay a structured hierarchy, with Pythagoras at the top as the master teacher. He was the rock star, and his followers were the groupies, eager to soak up his wisdom. They even had levels of initiation, like some kind of ancient math club with secret handshakes. These initiations were serious business. The neophytes, or akismatikoi, had to listen in silence for years before they could even think about speaking up. Imagine being in a lecture where questions aren't allowed for a decade. It's like an eternal silent retreat, minus the smoothies. Now, you might be wondering how a bunch of mathematicians and philosophers kept the lights on, so to speak. Well, Croton itself was economically prosperous, benefiting from its strategic location and thriving trade. Members of the sect often came from wealthy backgrounds, which meant they could fund their philosophical escapades. This allowed Pythagoras and his acolytes to focus on their esoteric pursuits without the pesky distraction of, earning a living. Of course, not everyone was a fan of Pythagoras' New World Order. Some locals were suspicious of this band of thinkers who seemed to be living by their own set of rules. The secrecy and exclusivity of the sect didn't help their reputation either. To outsiders, they could seem like a bunch of elitist oddballs with their own clubhouse, and let's be real, no one likes feeling excluded from the cool kids' table. Which brings us to a common theme in human history. When people don't understand something, they often fear it. And when they fear it, they might just try to destroy it. Pythagoras' sect was no stranger to controversy. Their ideas were revolutionary, and revolutions often have a way of making people uncomfortable, especially those in power. The political landscape of Croton was a hotbed of intrigue, with factions vying for influence. Pythagoras and his followers, with their alternative lifestyle and clout, inevitably rubbed some the wrong way. There are whispers of political conspiracies and power struggles, and it's easy to imagine how a group of intellectuals might become a convenient scapegoat for any unrest. Yet, it's these very controversies and myths that add layers to Pythagoras' legacy. Was he a visionary ahead of his time, or a charismatic cult leader with a penchant for control? The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in between. What's undeniable is the impact of his ideas, which rippled through time like the waves of the Aegean Sea he once sailed away from. In setting up his sect, Pythagoras wasn't just creating a community, he was crafting a new way of thinking about the world. His blend of spirituality and mathematics was a radical departure from the norm, a testament to his belief that numbers held the key to understanding the universe. Whether seen as a cult or a community, the Pythagorean way challenged the status quo, forcing people to rethink the relationship between the material and the mystical. So, as we leave Pythagoras and his band of number-crunching philosophers, remember that their story is far from over. The seeds planted in Croton would grow into ideas that would shape the world of mathematics, philosophy, and beyond. And while the legend of Pythagoras may be wrapped in mystery and myth, there's no denying the real, tangible legacy he left behind. A legacy of curiosity, questioning, and, yes, a little bit of quirk. Hang tight, there's more to this tale, and it only gets more intriguing from here. Now, we dive into the part of Pythagoras' story that gets every math teacher misty-eyed, the Pythagorean theorem. You know, that nifty little equation S plus B double CT, which has haunted students for centuries. But let's not kid ourselves, the hype around this theorem is as real as it gets. It's the mathematical equivalent of a best-selling album, but with fewer guitar solos and more right angles. So, let's unpack the origins of this mathematical masterpiece and see why it became the stuff of legend. First off, let's dispel the notion that Pythagoras just woke up one day, looked at a triangle, and had an epiphany. Like most great ideas, it was more evolution than revolution. The roots of the Pythagorean theorem can be traced back to the Babylonians and Indians, who were already dabbling with right triangles long before Pythagoras donned his philosopher's hat. The Babylonians, with their knack for calculations, had clay tablets dating to around 1800 BCE that showed they understood the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. So, while Pythagoras gets the credit, he was more like the guy who put a bow on an already wrapped gift. Credit where credit is due, but let's not ignore the fine print of history. But here's the thing, Pythagoras didn't just stop at the theorem. He and his followers went on to explore its applications, and this is where things get interesting. The theorem wasn't just academic drivel, it was a tool that helped build the world. Picture ancient architects and builders leaning on this theorem like a trusty hammer, using it to design temples, construct pyramids, and even lay out the foundations of entire cities. The Greeks, in particular, adored symmetry, and the Pythagorean theorem was like a divine cheat sheet for achieving perfect proportions. You could say it was the secret sauce behind many of their architectural masterpieces. Yet, with great power comes great mythology. There's a persistent legend that Pythagoras was so thrilled with the discovery of his theorem that he sacrificed 100 oxen to the gods. Now, isn't that a juicy story? But hold your horses, or oxen in this case. Pythagoras was a staunch vegetarian, so the idea of him orchestrating a massive barbecue is about as plausible as a cat leading a dog obedience class. This tale likely evolved from later storytellers who were more interested in drama than dietary restrictions. Moving on, let's chat about how the theorem influenced the Pythagorean cult. For Pythagoras' followers, mathematics was more than just numbers. It was a spiritual pursuit. They believed that numbers were the essence of all things, and the Pythagorean theorem was like a divine revelation that unlocked the mysteries of the universe. To them, the theorem was a symbol of cosmic harmony, embodying the idea that the universe was governed by mathematical principles. It was this mystical blend of math and spirituality that set the Pythagoreans apart from your run-of-the-mill mathematicians. But let's not romanticize too much. The Pythagorean cult also had its share of dogma and secrecy. The theorem was likely kept under wraps, passed down through the ranks of initiates like a prized secret. This exclusivity meant that while the Pythagorean theorem became a cornerstone of mathematical thought, its broader dissemination took time. It's like the world's best-kept secret, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to break into the mainstream. Economically, the theorem had a ripple effect on ancient societies. In a time when construction projects were massive undertakings, involving scores of labourers and resources, having a reliable method to calculate dimensions was a game changer. It saved time, reduced material waste, and ensured structural integrity. Imagine trying to build a temple without it. Those columns wouldn't just be leaning, they'd be positively lopsided. For city-states like Croton and others striving for architectural grandeur, the theorem was an unsung hero, quietly upholding the skyline. Of course, no history of the Pythagorean theorem would be complete without a nod to its enduring legacy. As time marched on, the theorem became a foundational element of geometry, finding its way into every math curriculum worth its salt. Over the centuries, it has sparked countless proofs and inspired mathematicians like Euclid, who included it in his seminal work, Elements. And let's not forget the modern world, where the theorem remains a staple in engineering, physics, and even art. It's like the little theorem that could prove that sometimes the simplest ideas have the longest shelf life. In the end, while Pythagoras may not have invented his eponymous theorem, he certainly recognized its potential and helped elevate it to iconic status. The theorem is a testament to the power of mathematical thought, a reminder that even in the ancient world, numbers held the key to unlocking untold possibilities. As we continue to explore the life and times of Pythagoras, let's keep in mind that his story is far from over. The Pythagorean theorem may have cemented his legacy, but it's just one chapter in a tale that still has many angles left to explore. Stay tuned, because the saga of Pythagoras is a geometric journey with plenty of twists and turns still to come. As the saga of Pythagoras continues, his life in Croton becomes a tale not just of triangles, but of political triangles, more complicated and with sharper edges. You might think that a guy obsessed with numbers would shy away from the messy world of politics, but Pythagoras was knee-deep in it, whether he liked it or not. His mathematical insights were like a double-edged sword, admired for their brilliance yet feared for the power they gave him. Croton was no ordinary city, it was a buzzing hub of intellectuals and athletes. Yet, in this bustling metropolis, Pythagoras' sect was a standout, or perhaps an eyesore, depending on whom you asked. His followers were more than just disciples, they were a potent political force. Imagine a community that's not only talking about the cosmos, but also wielding influence over the city's socio-economic fabric. Yep, that's a recipe for tension, if ever there was one. Pythagoras' mathematical insights weren't just the philosophical musings of a sage. They held practical applications that could, and did, influence everything from architecture to agriculture. For instance, the Pythagorean theorem wasn't merely a classroom exercise, it was a tool that made construction projects more efficient. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of having a smartphone app that guides you through your home renovation. This kind of power, mathematical and practical, made Pythagoras a figure of both admiration and suspicion. And let's not forget the economic angle. Croton was prosperous, sure, but resources weren't infinite. When Pythagoras' followers started gaining prominence, they weren't just engaging in academic debates, they were affecting the city's economic policies. Land distribution, resource allocation, and even trade were fair game for Pythagorean intervention, and not everyone was thrilled about it. Some locals felt that the sect was meddling too much in affairs that should concern everyone, not just those who could solve a quadratic equation in their sleep. Now, when you have a group holding sway over both philosophical and practical matters, you're bound to ruffle some feathers. Enter Croton's elite, the power players who didn't exactly appreciate being outshone by a bunch of toga-clad number crunchers. These were people who had, up until Pythagoras' arrival, enjoyed a monopoly on influence. They saw the Pythagorean sect as a threat to their status quo, a rogue element that could destabilize their grip on the city's reins. In this tense atmosphere, rival sects began to emerge. It's a classic case of, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, or at least form a competitive alternative. These rival groups weren't just about philosophical differences, they were political animals, seeking to attract followers who were skeptical of Pythagorean dominance. Picture it as an ancient version of brand rivalry, but instead of Coke versus Pepsi, it was Pythagoras versus the world. Pythagoras, with his charisma and intellect, inadvertently became a political figurehead, whether he wanted the title or not. His ideas, while revolutionary, became a lightning rod for controversy. Those in power began to fear that this sect with its communal living and secretive nature could morph into something more, something uncomfortably close to a parallel government. And indeed, the very structure of the Pythagorean community was hierarchical, with Pythagoras at the apex, followed by his most trusted followers. This hierarchical nature was both the sect's strength and its Achilles' heel. On one hand, it allowed for organized dissemination of ideas. On the other, it made the sect appear elitist and exclusionary to outsiders. To the average Crotonian, the Pythagoreans seemed like they were trying to rewrite the rules of society, and not everyone was on board with that. Rumors and myths began to swirl, as they often do when people feel threatened by what they don't understand. There were whispers of dark rituals and secret meetings, none of which helped the Pythagorean image. In reality, these were likely exaggerated tales, the kind that grow legs when fear and ignorance mix. But let's be honest, humans love a good scandal, and the Pythagorean sect provided ample fodder for gossip. And then there was the backlash. It was only a matter of time before the tensions came to a head. The combination of political influence, economic sway, and social exclusivity made Pythagoras and his followers a target. The elites, feeling the pressure of a shifting power dynamic, began to push back. It's the age-old dance of those in power trying to maintain their grip by any means necessary. This animosity culminated in what can only be described as a tragic climax. According to some accounts, a mob attacked the Pythagorean community, burning their meeting places and scattering the members. Whether this was a coordinated effort by rival factions or a spontaneous uprising fueled by fear, the result was the same. The Pythagorean sect, as it was known, disbanded and faded into the annals of history. Yet, even in his downfall, Pythagoras' legacy endured. His mathematical insights continued to shape the world long after the fires in Croton had died down. His story, rich with both brilliance and controversy, serves as a reminder that groundbreaking ideas often come at a cost. They challenge the status quo and, in doing so, can provoke both admiration and fear. But hold on to your compass and straightedge, because this isn't the end of the Pythagorean journey. The sect may have dispersed, but the ideas they championed took root, seeding future generations of thinkers. The political and social challenges Pythagoras faced reveal a timeless truth, that ideas, once sparked, have a life of their own. They travel beyond the borders of time and place, influencing those who dare to pick up the torch and carry it forward. As we ponder the fate of Pythagoras and his followers, we find ourselves at the crossroads where mathematics meets humanity, where numbers are not just abstract concepts but tools that can shape societies. The story of Pythagoras is one of vision and courage, a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. And while the flames of his community may have been extinguished, the fire of his ideas continues to burn brightly, waiting for the next bold thinker to fan its embers into a new blaze of discovery. Stay tuned. There's more to unravel in the geometric tapestry of Pythagoras' legacy. And so, with the embers of Pythagoras' community still smouldering in the background, we pivot to the aftermath, a time when the man himself was gone, but his ideas refused to be buried in the ashes. It's the classic tale of the phoenix, only this time our feathered friend is made of numbers and philosophical musings. The Pythagorean theorem, that trusty equation A plus B and C, became a math teacher's best friend and a student's nemesis, but it was far from the only legacy left behind. Pythagoras' ideas were like dandelion seeds caught in the wind, landing far and wide, sprouting in places he never even set foot. Take Plato, for instance, who was practically Pythagorean royalty in the mathematical world. He was so enamored with Pythagorean thought that he incorporated it into his own work, blending those divine numbers with his theories about forms and ideal states. If you ever wondered why Plato's philosophy sometimes reads like a math textbook, well, now you know who to blame. And then there's Euclid, the grandfather of geometry, who took Pythagoras' theorem and gave it a starring role in Elements, his magnum opus published around 300 BCE. This was a kind of ancient bestseller, the Harry Potter of its day, only with more angles and fewer wizards. Euclid didn't just reference the theorem, he built on it, providing one of the earliest proofs that would make any geometry teacher nod in approval. In doing so, he ensured that Pythagoras' fingerprints were all over the foundation of mathematical education for centuries. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Pythagoras wasn't just about numbers, he was also about mysticism. His belief in the transmigration of souls and the harmony of the spheres added a layer of metaphysical pizzazz that turned math from a dry subject to something almost magical. This spiritual dimension captivated minds long after his demise, offering a bridge between the tangible and the transcendent. It's like Pythagoras was serving a cocktail of mathematics and mysticism, and people just couldn't get enough of it. Yet, as with any good story, there's a twist. The same mystical reputation that elevated Pythagoras also muddied the waters of his legacy. The line between fact and fiction blurred over time, with legends sprouting faster than you can say isosceles. There are tales of Pythagoras having a golden thigh, talking to rivers, and even predicting earthquakes. While these stories are more entertaining than a blockbuster movie, they're about as historically accurate as a unicorn sighting. But let's face it, myths have a way of sticking because they make history feel like an epic saga rather than a dusty textbook. Meanwhile, in the realm of philosophy, Pythagoras' influence cast a long shadow. His idea that numbers were the essence of all things dovetailed beautifully with the philosophical musings of the time. It wasn't just about counting sheep, it was about understanding the universe itself. This perspective found champions in later mathematicians and philosophers who saw Pythagoras' work as a beacon guiding them through the fog of ignorance. Fast forward a few centuries, and you find the Pythagorean influence still alive and kicking during the Renaissance. Mathematicians like Fibonacci drew inspiration from Pythagorean thought, using it as a springboard for new discoveries. Fibonacci's famous sequence, which you might know from its appearances in everything from sunflower seeds to stock market analysis, is a testament to the enduring fascination with numbers that Pythagoras helped spark. And let's not forget the economic impact. In a world where architecture was akin to a national sport, the Pythagorean theorem was like a secret weapon. Whether it was constructing the Parthenon or laying roads, the theorem helped ancient societies build with precision and confidence. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about economic efficiency. Time was money, and a miscalculation could mean the difference between a standing structure and a pile of rubble. The theorem was like a mathematical insurance policy against disaster. So, what do we make of Pythagoras today? Is he the mystical sage wandering through the tunnels of time, or is he the rigorous mathematician laying the groundwork for modern science? The truth is, he's a bit of both. Pythagoras' legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of reality and imagination, each adding depth and color to the story. The allure of Pythagoras lies in this very duality. He stands at the crossroads of myth and mathematics, offering a narrative that satisfies our craving for wonder while grounding us in the practical world. His ideas have endured because they speak to the human condition, the quest for knowledge, the awe of the cosmos, and the desire to find order in chaos. As we close the book on Pythagoras, let's take a moment to appreciate the complex figure behind the legend. His journey from the bustling trade routes of Samos to the intellectual halls of Croton and beyond is a testament to the power of ideas to transcend borders and time. Pythagoras may have left the stage centuries ago, but his influence continues to reverberate through the ages like the harmonious notes of a lyre echoing in the distance. In the end, Pythagoras' story is more than just a historical account. It's a reminder of the human capacity for curiosity and innovation. Whether you're solving equations or contemplating the mysteries of existence, there's a little bit of Pythagoras in all of us. So the next time you find yourself grappling with a right triangle or pondering the nature of reality, tip your hat to the man who showed us that the world is as boundless as our imagination, and just as fascinating. The sun rises over Tenochtitlan, casting a golden hue on the bustling scene below. You've just stepped into the heart of this Aztec metropolis, where the morning air is thick with the scent of fresh produce and the chatter of vendors hawking their wares. It's a cacophony of life that would make Times Square look like a quiet countryside. Welcome to the Tlatelolco market, the city's economic engine, a place where you can buy anything from a robust turkey to a delicate feathered headdress, provided you got the cacao beans to pay for it. Yes, those little beans aren't just for your morning mocha. They're currency here, and a precious one at that. Now, let's talk numbers, because in Tenochtitlan, they matter. A single cacao bean might snag you a tomato or two, but if you're eyeing a rabbit, you're looking at 30 beans. Want a turkey? Prepare to hand over around 200 beans. It's like an ancient version of Bitcoin, but you can actually eat it. And speaking of eating, maize is the real MVP here. This staple grain is the backbone of the Aztec diet, as crucial as Wi-Fi in a modern cafe. A woman's daily workload includes grinding enough maize to make tortillas for the family, which is quite the arm workout. Forget your gym membership. But the market is more than just a place to shop till you drop. It's a reflection of the social hierarchy and political dynamics that underpin the Aztec Empire. See that merchant over there, dressed in vibrant cotton clothes? He's a potsticker. These guys are the rock stars of the trade world, traversing vast distances to bring exotic goods to the market. They're like the Amazon Prime of the Aztec era, minus the drones. Their success elevates their status, giving them influence that rivals the nobility, which is no small feat in a society where class lines are drawn as sharply as obsidian blades. And speaking of sharp, the Aztec Empire itself is as complex as a game of 3D chess. It's a place where religion, warfare, and politics intertwine like strands in an intricate textile. The market is a microcosm of this, bustling with energy and tension, a stage where power is displayed and battles are fought, albeit with bartering rather than blades. Every transaction here is a tiny echo of the empire's broader conquests, from the acquisition of tribute to the subjugation of rival city-states. When you haggle over a bundle of feathers, you're not just buying a hat accessory, you're participating in a centuries-old economic dance. Yet there's a darker side to this vibrant tapestry. The wealth of the market is built on the backs of the conquered, tributes streaming in from cities like Texcoco and Tlacopan, the other 2 points of the Aztec Triple Alliance. They supply goods and labor, fueling the empire's insatiable appetite for expansion. It's a reality that undercuts the romanticized vision of a harmonious society. The Aztecs were brilliant engineers and fierce warriors, but their empire was also a machine that thrived on conflict and subjugation. So, while you wander these stalls, it's worth remembering that the dazzling array of goods comes with a hefty price tag, one paid not in cacao beans but in human lives. As you navigate the market, the anticipation of the day's warrior celebrations hangs in the air. The Aztecs are gearing up for a festival that celebrates their military prowess, and the market is abuzz with preparations. Vendors weave through the crowd, selling everything from ceremonial garb to the spices needed for the evening's feast. There's an electric energy, a sense of pride and tradition that pulses through the city. Today you're not just a shopper in Tlatelolco. You're a witness to the spectacle of an empire at the height of its power, poised to honor the warriors who defend its borders and expand its reach. In this vibrant marketplace, you're standing at the crossroads of commerce and culture, where every transaction tells a story of ambition, conquest, and survival. It's a day in Tenochtitlan, but it's also a chapter in the larger saga of the Aztec Empire, a tale as rich and complex as the goods that fill the stalls around you. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the bustling plaza, you can't help but wonder how this day will unfold amid the chaos and splendor of Aztec life. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, the air in Tenochtitlan is tingling with anticipation. The market buzzes with life, but we're shifting our focus to the warriors preparing for the day's festivities. These guys aren't just any soldiers, they're the rock stars of the Aztec world, the elite fighting force that makes the empire's neighbors quake in their sandals. But before you start imagining a life of glory and battle cries, let's dive into what it really takes to become one of these legendary figures. First up, the morning routine. Forget your average stretch and yawn wake-up call. Aztec warriors start their day with rituals that blend the sacred and the strenuous. Picture this. A young warrior, barely out of his teens, stands at the edge of the calm waters of Lake Texcoco. He's not there for a sunrise swim, though. Instead, he's performing a ritual purification, a daily cleanse that's as much about spiritual readiness as it is about hygiene. In a society where religion and war are 2 sides of the same obsidian blade, this ritual is non-negotiable. From there, it's off to the Kalmakak, the elite training school where warriors are forged. Think of it as West Point meets Hogwarts, but with less Quidditch and more jaguar skins. Here, young men undergo rigorous training that would make a modern boot camp look like a spa retreat. We're talking about mastering the art of the maquahuitl, a weapon that's a cross between a sword and a chainsaw. Imagine a wooden club embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades, capable of slicing through an enemy's armor like a hot knife through butter. It's a fearsome tool, but it requires precision and skill to wield effectively. One wrong swing, and you could end up missing a limb. Training isn't just about brute strength, though. It's also about strategy. The Aztecs didn't conquer an empire by wandering aimlessly onto the battlefield. Their military tactics were as calculated as a chess game, with each warrior drilled in formations and maneuvers that would give Napoleon a run for his money. The cornerstone of their strategy? The Untold, a formation that allowed warriors to encircle and overwhelm their enemies, cutting off escape routes with the precision of a surgeon. It's a dance of death that requires absolute discipline and coordination. One misstep, and the entire formation could crumble like a poorly baked cake. Of course, the most seasoned warriors aren't just training, they're mentoring the rookies. The older warriors, veterans of countless campaigns, share their hard-won wisdom with the younger generation. These lessons are no walk in the park, though. They're brutal, honest, and often delivered with the subtlety of a jaguar's roar. After all, the battlefield is no place for sugarcoating. It's a harsh reality that the romanticized view of warrior life often glosses over. For every tale of heroic conquest, there's a sobering story of loss and sacrifice. And then there's the politics of warfare. In Aztec society, war isn't just about expanding territory, it's a vital component of the empire's social and political structure. The concept of the flowery war, or exochiaoyotl, is a perfect example. These highly ritualized conflicts were less about conquest and more about capturing prisoners for sacrifice. In a society where appeasing the gods was paramount, warriors were as much priests as they were soldiers, offering the ultimate tribute with their captives. It's a grim reminder that the glory of the warrior's path is shadowed by the spectre of death, both given and received. But let's not get too bogged down in the grim details. There's a certain romance to the life of an Aztec warrior that can't be denied. The fierce camaraderie, the pride in one's skill, and the honor of serving the empire are all powerful motivators. It's the same allure that has drawn young men and women to the military throughout history, from the samurai of Japan to the knights of medieval Europe. Yet, while the legends may be draped in glory, the reality is far more complex, layered with the gritty texture of human conflict and the relentless march of empire. As you watch these warriors prepare, it's clear that their path is one of paradoxes, glory and gore, honor and horror, ritual and reality. It's a life that demands everything and promises nothing, save the chance to etch one's name into the annals of history. So, while the sun reaches its zenith over Tenochtitlan, casting its golden light on the warriors below, take a moment to appreciate the intricate dance of power, politics, and prowess that defines their world. It's a spectacle as captivating as it is sobering. A chapter in the epic saga of the Aztec Empire that continues to unfold with each passing day. Now, as the sun sits proudly at its zenith, casting a brilliant glow over Tenochtitlan, it's time to dive headfirst into the midday ceremonies. These are no ordinary parades with floats and confetti. We're talking about spectacles that make a Super Bowl halftime show look like a backyard barbecue. Welcome to the heart of Aztec pageantry, where warriors are more than just soldiers. They're living symbols of the empire's might and divine favor. Let's start with the visuals, because the Aztecs weren't just about function, they were about flair. Picture warriors decked out in elaborate costumes, each piece dripping with symbolism and status. These aren't your run-of-the-mill uniforms. We're talking eagle and jaguar suits that could make a Hollywood costume designer weep with envy. The eagle warrior, or Cuautli, struts about in a feathered headdress that screams, "I'm the top of the food chain," while the jaguar warrior, the Oxlotl, prowls in a spotted suit that would make any fashionista purr with delight. But don't let the fashion show fool you. These costumes are more than just eye candy. They're a visual language, a way of communicating rank and valor without saying a word. Each feather, each spot, is a badge of honor, earned through feats of bravery on the battlefield. In a society where reputation can be as valuable as cacao beans, these warriors are walking resumes, flaunting achievements that would make a LinkedIn profile blush. Now, let's talk about the ceremony itself. A choreographed blend of drama and devotion. The warriors gather in the main plaza, beneath the towering Templo Mayor, the grand temple dedicated to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. This isn't just a backdrop, it's a sacred stage where the lines between earthly power and divine mandate blur. The temple's twin staircases are the runways, where priests, clad in flowing robes and bearing the marks of their station, perform rituals that would make modern-day pageantry seem quaint. Here, the air is thick with the scent of copal incense, a fragrant cloud that signals the presence of the sacred. The priests chant hymns in Nahuatl, their voices rising and falling like waves crashing against the shores of Lake Texcoco. It's a spectacle that captivates the senses, drawing the crowd into a shared experience that's part religious fervour, part theatrical wonder. But don't be fooled by the grandeur. This isn't just about putting on a good show. It's about reinforcing the power structures that keep the empire humming along. See, in Aztec society, religion and politics are as inseparable as two sides of a codex. The ceremonies are a powerful reminder of the divine right of the rulers and the warriors. They're a visual manifesto of the empire's divine mandate to rule and conquer, a cosmic endorsement that's hard to argue with when you're staring up at a temple that scrapes the sky. And at the centre of it all are the warriors, the beating heart of the empire's might. But let's not tiptoe around the darker side of these festivities. No discussion of Aztec ceremonies would be complete without addressing the elephant in the room, human sacrifice. Yeah, it's a grim topic, and it's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism. But let's unpack it a bit, because it's a lot more complex than a simple bloodbath for the gods. Human sacrifice in Aztec culture is both a religious duty and a political tool. It's about maintaining cosmic order, feeding the gods who, in turn, ensure the sun rises and the maize grows. It's a transaction of divine proportions, where the currency is not cacao beans but human lives. Captured warriors, the real prizes of the flowery wars, are the stars of this grim show. They're not just victims, they're crucial participants in a ritual that's as much about reaffirming social hierarchies as it is about appeasing the gods. So how does this all play into the social order? Well, in a society where the divine and the mundane are intertwined, these ceremonies serve to cement the power of the ruling class. They're a stark reminder to the populace of who holds the keys to both earthly and cosmic power. The warriors, revered and feared, are living embodiments of this power, their very presence, a testament to the empire's strength and the gods' favour. But here's where the nuance comes in. These rituals are also about community cohesion. They're shared experiences that bind the people together, creating a sense of unity in the face of the divine drama unfolding before them. It's a potent mix of faith, fear, and spectacle, a cocktail that keeps the social fabric from unravelling. Of course, it's easy to look back from our modern vantage point and shake our heads at the brutality. But let's not forget the appeal of these rituals, the pageantry, the sense of belonging, the awe-inspiring scale. They're a testament to the human need for narrative, for stories that make sense of a chaotic world. In that sense, the Aztecs aren't so different from us. They just wrote their stories with a slightly sharper pen. As the ceremony reaches its crescendo, with drums pounding and conch shells blaring, it's clear that this is more than just a midday diversion. It's a high-stakes performance where every player has a role, from the priests and warriors to the awestruck citizens gathered below. It's a spectacle that encapsulates the complexities of Aztec life, where faith and power dance a delicate duet under the watchful eyes of the gods. So, as you stand in the throng, feeling the rhythm of the drums reverberate through your bones, take a moment to appreciate the layers of meaning woven into the fabric of this ritual. It's a tapestry of power, piety, and politics, a testament to the intricate dance that is Aztec society. And as the ceremony draws to a close, with the warriors standing tall in their resplendent costumes, remember that this is just one chapter in the epic saga of the Aztec Empire, a story that's far from over. And as the final notes of the ceremony echo through the plaza, the Aztecs don't miss a beat. The afternoon is gearing up for the kind of festivities that'd make Mardi Gras look like a knitting circle. Welcome to the grand spectacle of Tenochtitlan, where entertainment is as much about politics as it is about pleasure. First stop on this cultural carousel is the ball court, an arena that's part sports venue, part sacrificial altar. We're talking Tlachtli, a game that combines the athleticism of soccer, the strategy of chess, and the stakes of Russian roulette. Picture a stone court, larger than a football field, flanked by high walls adorned with skull racks, because nothing says game on like a display of human skulls. The objective? Get a rubber ball through a stone hoop mounted high on the court walls. Sounds easy, right? Just remember you can only use your hips, knees and elbows. Oh, and the ball weighs about 9 pounds, so it's less like a beach ball and more like a cannonball with an identity crisis. But here's the kicker: winning isn't always the goal. In some cases, the winning team ends up being sacrificed, a dubious honor that underscores the spiritual stakes of the game. It's a potent reminder that in Aztec society, the line between life and death is as thin as a blade of grass. The Tlachtli court is a microcosm of the empire's values, where skill and sacrifice go hand in hand, and where every play is a nod to the gods watching from above. Now, why all the fuss over a ball game? It's not just about the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. It's about politics, baby. These games are a stage for the ruling class to demonstrate control and divine favor. They're a massive PR campaign with high stakes and higher drama, designed to keep the populace entertained and in awe of the ruling elite. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a state-sponsored reality show, with a bit more gravitas and a lot more at stake. As the ball game winds down, the air thick with the tension of near misses and the thud of rubber on stone, the day's entertainment is far from over. Next up is the feast, a culinary extravaganza that would make any foodie swoon. Imagine a spread filled with tamales, tortillas, and a variety of meats, from rabbit to turkey, seasoned with the kind of spices that could make your taste buds do a little dance of their own. And let's not forget the pulque, a fermented beverage made from the sap of the maguey plant, serving as the social lubricant of choice. It's a drink that's as much about bonding as it is about indulgence, a reminder that even warriors need a little liquid courage off the battlefield. But let's dive a bit deeper into the economics of this feast. It's not just about stuff in your face, though that's certainly part of the fun. These gatherings are a display of wealth and power, a way for the ruling class to showcase their ability to provide for the masses. It's a bit like a political campaign rally, but with more corn and less rhetoric. The ruler's ability to throw a grand feast is a public demonstration of their wealth, influence, and divine favor. It's a tangible way to reinforce social hierarchies, where the rich and powerful sit at the head of the table while the rest of us fight for the scraps. Yet, beyond the glitz and gastronomy, there's a more insidious aspect lurking beneath the surface. This public display of abundance is built on the backs of tributary city-states, forced to supply the empire with goods and labor. The wealth that fills the banquet tables is a stark reminder of the empire's reach, underscoring the power dynamics at play. It's a feast that tastes of conquest and control, a savory slice of imperial propaganda served up with a side of maize. And speaking of propaganda, let's unpack the myth of the noble savage that often clings to narratives of pre-Columbian societies. The Aztecs, with their grand displays of ritual and power, are frequently romanticized as a society of spiritual warriors living in harmony with nature. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find a complex web of politics, power, and human ambition. These public gatherings are anything but simple celebrations. They're calculated displays designed to maintain social order and reinforce the ruler's divine right to govern. In the bustling heart of Tenochtitlan, these festivities serve a dual purpose. They're a form of entertainment, yes, but they're also a tool for social cohesion. They remind the populace of the power and benevolence of their rulers, even as they highlight the social stratification that underpins the empire. They're a communal experience that binds the people together in shared awe and reverence, a potent cocktail of spectacle and subjugation that keeps the wheels of the Aztec Empire turning. So, as the afternoon sun begins to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows over the bustling city, take a moment to appreciate the layers of meaning embedded in these festivities. They're a testament to the complex interplay of power, politics, and culture that defined Aztec society. And as the revelry continues late into the day, remember that the story of Tenochtitlan is far from over. This is just one chapter in a tale of triumph and tragedy, a narrative as rich and layered as the city itself. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the bustling heart of Tenochtitlan, it's time to take a step back and consider the bigger picture, the legacy of the Aztec warriors and their place in history. Now, before we get all misty-eyed and start romanticizing these folks as noble savages painted in the sepia tones of a National Geographic spread, let's crack open the codex and dig into the nitty-gritty of their story. The Aztec warriors, with their feathered headdresses and obsidian-studded maquahuitls, have been both glorified and vilified over the centuries. They're often depicted as either bloodthirsty barbarians or tragic figures valiantly resisting the tide of European conquest. But the truth, as always, is more nuanced. Let's start with the numbers. At the height of their power in the early 16th century, the Aztec Empire boasted a population of around 5 to 6 million. That's a metropolis in its own right, a bustling hub that rivaled any European city of the era. And in the centre of this empire were the warriors, the beating heart of its military might and the enforcers of its imperial will. These warriors weren't just muscle-bound brutes with a penchant for violence. They were part of a highly organized military machine, one that relied on strategy as much as strength. The Aztecs employed a variety of tactics, from the aforementioned Otontan formation to psychological warfare tactics that would make Sun Tzu nod in approval. Their military campaigns weren't just about conquest, they were about securing tribute, expanding trade networks, and maintaining the delicate balance of power with neighbouring city-states. In short, they were playing a geopolitical game long before the term was coined. But let's not dance around the elephant in the room. Human sacrifice? Yes, it was a thing. And yes, it's easy to recoil in horror from our modern perspective. But to dismiss it as mere savagery is to misunderstand its complex role in Aztec society. Sacrifice was a deeply ingrained ritual that was as much about social cohesion and religious devotion as it was about appeasing the gods. It reinforced social hierarchies, affirmed the divine right of the rulers, and served as a grim reminder of the stakes at play in the cosmic drama of life and death. In a world where the sun's daily rise was seen as a struggle between cosmic forces, sacrifice wasn't just a religious act, it was a necessity. Despite the harsh realities, there's an undeniable allure to the Aztec warrior ethos. The sense of duty, the camaraderie, and the honor of serving the empire are themes that resonate even today. It's the stuff of legends, the kind of tales that inspire epic poetry and Hollywood blockbusters. But let's not forget the cost of this glory, the human lives spent in the relentless pursuit of expansion and control. For every warrior who returned home with tales of valor, there were countless others who became footnotes in the annals of history. Now, let's fast forward a bit to the European arrival on the scene. The Spanish conquest, led by Hernán Cortés, has been romanticized as a clash of civilizations, a dramatic showdown between the old world and the new. But the reality was less a noble duel and more a brutal collision of cultures. The Aztecs, despite their military prowess and organizational skills, were no match for the combination of European steel, smallpox, and strategic alliances with rival city-states. Within a few short years, the mighty Aztec Empire was toppled, its cities plundered, and its people subjugated. This brings us to the modern implications of these narratives. The story of the Aztecs is often simplified in popular culture, reduced to caricatures of noble savages or ruthless conquerors. But understanding the complexity of their society is crucial to challenging these stereotypes and appreciating their true contributions to history. The Aztecs were more than just warriors and conquerors. They were builders, astronomers, and poets. They developed an intricate calendar, built floating gardens, and constructed one of the most sophisticated urban centers of their time. In acknowledging these achievements, we're forced to confront the uncomfortable truths of colonial narratives that have shaped our understanding of history. The vilification of the Aztecs as bloodthirsty heathens served to justify the conquest and colonization of their lands, erasing the richness of their culture in favor of a narrative that painted Europeans as the bearers of civilization. It's a reminder of the power of storytelling, of how the stories we tell shape our understanding of the past and influence our present. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of a day in the life of an Aztec warrior, let's take a moment to appreciate the layers of complexity that define their legacy. They were fierce and formidable, yes, but they were also part of a society that was as sophisticated and multifaceted as any in history. By understanding the realities of their world, we can challenge the myths and embrace the richness of their story. A story that continues to resonate in the rhythm of modern Mexico, in the vibrant traditions and cultural tapestry that have survived the ravages of conquest and time. And as the stars begin to twinkle over the now quiet city of Tenochtitlan, casting their ancient light over the ruins and the stories they hold, it's clear that the legacy of the Aztec warriors is far from forgotten. It's a legacy that invites us to look beyond the surface, to delve into the depths of human history and emerge with a richer understanding of who we are and where we've come from. So here's to the Aztecs, to their complexities and contradictions, to their triumphs and tragedies. May their story continue to remind us of the power of history to illuminate the path forward, even as it echoes from the past. If you've ever thought of ancient China and conjured up images of serene landscapes, emperors lounging on silk cushions, and farmers happily whistling while planting rice, it's time to wake up and smell the reality. Let's dive into the not-so-idyllic world of ancient China's economic backbone, where rice and millet weren't just staples, but the beating heart of an empire's prosperity, or its downfall, depending on the harvest. Rice and millet were to ancient China what oil is to the modern economy, essential, powerful, and fraught with drama. The Yangtze River Delta was the land of rice, while millet found its home in the drier north. These grains weren't just filling bellies, they were the currency of survival and status. Forget your morning bowl of cereal, these crops could make or break fortunes. In an era without tractors or GPS-guided farming, everything depended on muscle and a hope that the weather wouldn't turn your fields into a muddy disaster. Now, feeding an empire wasn't a small feat. We're talking about a vast territory with a population that, by the Han Dynasty 206 BCE, 206 EE, 206 EE, was pushing 60 million souls. That's like trying to feed the entire population of Italy today. The logistics were a nightmare. Roads were a luxury, and transporting goods relied on donkeys, oxen, and the occasional river barge. If you ever cursed at a pothole, just be glad you weren't traversing the rutted paths of rural China with a cartload of grain. The social hierarchy was as rigid as a bamboo pole, with farmers holding a curious place in the social order. Officially, they were esteemed for their critical role in society. Unofficially, they were the empire's pack mules, bearing the weight of taxation that made modern tax season seem like a leisurely stroll. Taxes were paid in grain, and a bad harvest didn't exempt you. You just starved faster. It was a rough gig, and no amount of Confucian platitudes about the virtue of hard work could soften the blow of an empty stomach. Now, let's bust some myths about the emperor's dining habits. The common folk were lucky to get a bowl of rice gruel with the occasional scrap of meat. The emperor, though? He wasn't exactly slumming it with the same menu. Imperial banquets were a display of opulence, with dishes featuring exotic ingredients and flavors that would make a modern-day foodie's head spin. Think of it as the ancient version of a Michelin-starred tasting menu, while the peasants played the role of unpaid extras in this culinary drama. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine a harmonious society where everyone knew their place and was content with it. But the truth is, ancient China was a complex web of economic pressures and social obligations. Farmers were the backbone of society, but they carried a burden that could crush them if the stars or the rains didn't align just right. It was a world where the next meal was never guaranteed, and the emperor's next banquet was always assured. So as we set the stage for this exploration of ancient China's economy, remember that behind the legends of prosperity and harmony lies a story of grit, toil, and survival against the odds. It's a story that resonates even today, reminding us of the power and peril of those humble grains that fed an empire. Now, let's step out of the rice paddies and into the buzzing markets of ancient China, where the air was thick with the smell of spices, the clamour of barter, and the rustle of silk, a fabric so valued it might as well have been woven from pure gold. Silk wasn't just the fabric of the elite, it was a currency of its own, a sartorial stock exchange that powered an economy and adorned an empire. In a world before paper and coinage became mainstream, silk served as a luxury trade item, a portable wealth that could be worn, gifted, or traded. The Silk Road, that legendary trade route stretching all the way from China to the Mediterranean, was less a single road and more a tangled web of paths and exchanges. It was the original global marketplace, where you could find everything from Chinese silk to Indian spices, Persian silver, and Roman glass. The Silk Road wasn't so much a highway as it was a high-stakes game of Monopoly, where tariffs and trade disputes were as common as the bandits lurking in the shadows. Let's talk numbers for a moment. During the Han Dynasty, when the Silk Road was at its bustling best, silk was exported in quantities that would make even the most seasoned traders' eyes pop. A single bolt of silk could fetch prices in Rome that were reportedly equivalent to a soldier's entire annual salary. Imagine buying a t-shirt today for the price of a luxury car. It's not far off. And while the emperors of China were happy to see their coffers swell with foreign treasures, they weren't thrilled about losing all that silk. The Chinese government, ever the spoilsport, implemented regulations to control the silk trade, hoping to keep some of that precious fabric within their own borders. But like trying to stop a sneeze, their efforts were only somewhat successful. Now, here's where we bust a myth or two. The Silk Road isn't just a romanticized highway of cultural exchange and exotic goods. It was also a corridor of conflict and compromise, a place where cultures clashed as often as they connected. Traders had to navigate not just rugged terrains and hostile climates, but also a patchwork of taxes and tolls imposed by the myriad kingdoms and empires along the way. Picture trying to drive across Europe today, but at every border, there's a toll booth demanding payment in the form of your best suit. That's a bit like what these traders faced. And then there were the bandits, because nothing screams adventure like the constant threat of robbery. These luxury goods, silk chief among them, had an enormous impact on the economy back home. The demand for silk-fueled agricultural innovations and encouraged the development of sericulture, the art and science of silk farming. The mulberry trees, those unsuspecting heroes of the silk industry, were cultivated with the dedication of a modern tech startup. Silk production wasn't just about the fabric, it was about the entire ecosystem that supported it, from the silkworms themselves to the farmers who tended them. This industry was a microcosm of the larger economy, interconnected, complex, and utterly dependent on the whims of nature and the demands of the market. Yet, despite all the glamour associated with silk, the reality of its production was far from luxurious. If you think your job is tough, spare a thought for the workers who spent their days in the sweltering heat, meticulously unraveling cocoons to extract the threads. It was a painstaking process, one that required skill and patience in equal measure. The silk might have been soft, but the labour behind it was anything but. This dichotomy between the sumptuous silk robes worn by the elite and the gritty, grinding work that produced them mirrors the broader economic structures of ancient China. Behind every opulent display of wealth was a hidden layer of toil and sacrifice. It's a reminder that even in a world where silk was king, the threads of economic reality were woven with struggle and survival. As we journey further along this narrative, let's keep in mind that the Silk Road was more than just a trade route. It was a bridge between worlds, a testament to human ingenuity and endurance. And like any good story, it holds a mirror to the complexities of human nature, showing us both the beauty and the burden of our desires. We'll delve deeper into these themes in the next part, exploring how the interplay of luxury and labour shaped not just an economy, but an empire. So, stay tuned. There's plenty more to unravel in the saga of ancient China's economic tapestry. Just as the Silk Road was more than a mere dusty trade route, technology and innovation in ancient China were more than the sum of their parts. They were the gears and cogs that drove the great machine of its economy. Let's start with an invention that took the world by storm: paper. Forget your digital screens and e-books. In the 2nd century BCE, the Han dynasty's Kai Lun was the Steve Jobs of papermaking, revolutionizing how information was recorded and shared. Despite popular lore crediting him with the invention, paper existed in rudimentary forms before Kai Lun's time. His genius lay in refining the process, using materials like mulberry bark and fish nets to create a product that was durable, affordable, and, crucially, lightweight. Paper's impact was profound. Imagine the bureaucratic chaos of managing an empire using only bamboo slips or silk scrolls. It's like trying to run a modern corporation with post-it notes. With paper, records became easier to store, taxes simpler to track, and communication more efficient. Talk about a game changer. And speaking of taxes, let's not forget the infamous Great Wall tax. This wasn't just about keeping the Mongols at bay. It was a financial juggernaut that funded a colossal construction project, one brick and begrudging taxpayer at a time. Now, the Great Wall might conjure images of a majestic, unbroken line of stone snaking across the mountains. The reality? It was a patchwork of walls built over centuries, more like a series of disconnected Lego sets than a seamless barrier. The wall's construction was a testament to human endurance and ingenuity, but it was also a bureaucratic nightmare. the tax levied to fund it was as relentless as a Game of Thrones winter, a burden that fell heavily on the shoulders of the common folk. Picture this. You're a farmer barely scraping by, and now you have to fork over your hard-earned grain to build a wall that might not even protect your village. It's like being charged for a security system that only guards your neighbor's house. Technology and innovation in ancient China weren't just limited to paper and walls, though. Let's talk about the iron plough, an agricultural marvel that transformed farming from back-breaking labor to slightly less back-breaking labor. By the 6th century BCE, the Chinese were using cast iron to make ploughs that could cut through the soil like a hot knife through butter. This innovation increased productivity, allowing farmers to cultivate larger areas with less effort. It wasn't exactly a John Deere tractor, but it was a leap forward that boosted grain production and, by extension, the entire economy. Of course, the adoption of these technologies wasn't always smooth. It wasn't like ancient farmers were lining up for the latest iPlow. Resistance to change was as real then as it is now. Traditional methods were deeply ingrained, and convincing people to adopt new tools was often a Herculean task. Imagine trying to convince your grandparents to switch from a flip phone to a smartphone, and you get the idea. The introduction of these innovations required not just technological savvy, but also political and social maneuvering to ensure widespread acceptance. And speaking of acceptance, let's not gloss over the silk weaving technology that turned China into the textile powerhouse of the ancient world. The invention of the draw loom around 400 BCE allowed weavers to create complex patterns, turning silk into high art. This wasn't just about making pretty fabric, it was about creating a product so desirable that even the Romans couldn't get enough of it. In a way, China's mastery of silk weaving was the original brand dominance, with silk itself serving as the must-have luxury item of the ancient world. But with great power comes great regulation. The Chinese government, ever the micromanager, sought to control the silk industry with an iron fist, or should we say, a silk glove. Laws were enacted to protect the secrets of silk production, making smuggling silkworms, or revealing the techniques a crime punishable by death. Talk about protecting your intellectual property. The legends of spies and intrigue surrounding the silk trade are thrilling, but the reality was a lot less glamorous, and a lot more about keeping the economic engine humming smoothly. Yet, despite all these advances, it's crucial to remember that the allure of technology and innovation often masked the harsh realities behind them. The workers who built the Great Wall weren't exactly volunteers on a corporate retreat, they were conscripts, toiling away under brutal conditions with little reward. Similarly, the artisans perfecting the art of papermaking or silk weaving often worked long hours for minimal pay, their contributions largely unacknowledged by history. It's a reminder that while technology can elevate societies, it can also exploit individuals. As we dig even deeper into the annals of ancient China's economic evolution, keep in mind the dual nature of progress. For every technological marvel that dazzled the empire, there was a shadow of human toil and sacrifice. The innovations that shaped ancient China were both a blessing and a bureaucratic nightmare, a testament to human ingenuity and a reflection of the age-old struggle between power and the populace. And while we've covered a lot of ground today, there's still much more to uncover in the epic tale of ancient China's economic tapestry. So stick around, because the story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting. Now, as we dig deeper into the annals of ancient China's economic evolution, let's talk about the empire's financial whiz-kids, not the stockbrokers of Wall Street, but the tax collectors and currency makers who kept the empire's coffers clinking. You see, behind every grand palace and exquisite banquet was a labyrinthine system of taxation and currency that even the most seasoned CPA might find daunting. Let's start with the currency, shall we? Long before Bitcoin and its digital ilk, ancient China was juggling copper coins like a circus act, with the kind of flair that would make a modern economist break into a cold sweat. These weren't just any coins. They were the heart and soul of commerce, stamped with imperial authority and a hole in the middle for easy stringing. Forget your wallet. Ancient Chinese traders were all about that bling, swinging strings of coins like fashion accessories. These copper coins, known as cash, were as ubiquitous as they were heavy. In the Han Dynasty, it wasn't uncommon to find yourself lugging around over 1,000 coins just to buy a decent silk robe, a little like hauling bags of pennies to buy a designer handbag today. But here's where the romanticized image of a smoothly functioning economy gets a reality check. The minting of coins was a state-controlled affair, with the government keen on maintaining its monopoly. Counterfeiting was rampant. Imagine the ancient version of printing your own money at home, and the penalties were, unsurprisingly, severe. We're talking about punishments that made a parking ticket look like a pat on the back. Yet, for all its flaws, this copper coinage was a technological marvel for its time, a symbol of an interconnected economy that stretched from the bustling markets of Chang'an to the farthest reaches of the empire. Now, if you thought the world of ancient currency was complicated, let's wade into the murky waters of taxation. It's a truth universally acknowledged that nobody likes a tax collector, and in ancient China, these folks were about as popular as a wasp at a picnic. Taxes were a mix of grain, labour and coin, with farmers often bearing the heaviest burden. Picture this. You've just harvested your crops after months of back-breaking work, only to watch a chunk of it carted off to satisfy the taxman. It's enough to make anyone yearn for a simpler life, or at least a tax break. The infamous salt monopoly was another cog in the empire's economic machine, a state-run enterprise so lucrative it could give modern monopolies a run for their money. Salt wasn't just a seasoning, it was a preservative, a commodity that held the power to sway economies and sustain armies. By controlling the production and distribution of salt, the government ensured a steady stream of revenue while keeping a tight grip on one of life's essentials. The folks managing this monopoly were living the ancient bureaucrats' dream-secure jobs and a steady paycheck, all thanks to the empire's insatiable appetite for salt. Of course, the tax system wasn't just about squeezing the populace dry. In theory, it was a means of redistributing wealth, funding public works, and maintaining the grand machinery of the state. In practice, though, it was a constant juggling act, with corruption and inefficiency lurking around every corner. The tax collectors, often recruited from the ranks of local elites, were tasked with walking the fine line between pleasing their superiors and not inciting a peasant revolt. Not an easy job, and definitely not one that would win you any popularity contests. And yes, there were revolts, because when the tax burden became too heavy, the people pushed back. The Yellow Turban Rebellion of the late Han dynasty was one such uprising, a movement fueled by economic despair and social unrest. Tens of thousands of peasants donned yellow scarves and took up arms against a government they saw as corrupt and unjust. Their battle cry? A demand for fairer taxes and a government that served the people, not just the privileged few. It was a reminder that while the state controlled the purse strings, the real power often lay with the masses. The stark contrast between the romanticized visions of imperial prosperity and the gritty reality of economic survival is a tale as old as time. It's easy to look back and see only the grandeur of emperors and palaces, but the truth is that ancient China's economic engine ran on the sweat and toil of its citizens. The farmers who laboured in the fields, the artisans who crafted the coins, and the traders who traversed treacherous roads. They were the unsung heroes of an empire that often took their contributions for granted. Yet, for all its challenges, ancient China's economy was a marvel of ingenuity and adaptability. It was an intricate dance of supply and demand, a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity. The currency and tax systems, with all their flaws, were the threads that held the empire together, weaving a tapestry of prosperity and hardship that still resonates today. As we continue our journey through the economic history of ancient China, let's keep in mind that the story is far from over. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more realities to confront. So, stay with us as we delve deeper into the complexities of an ancient economy that was as vibrant as it was volatile. There's plenty more to explore, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting. Now, with all this historical context firmly under our belts, let's untangle the web of ancient China's economy and see how it either fortified or fractured the political stability of the era. Imagine a seesaw, with economic prosperity on one end and political stability on the other. Too much weight on either side, and you're in for a bumpy ride, or worse, a complete wipeout. First, let's talk trade, that double-edged sword of wealth and woe. On one hand, the Silk Road was a glittering artery of commerce that pumped riches into China's heart. It was like a financial superhighway, where fortune-seekers and merchants played a high-stakes game of risk, all in the name of luxury goods. This influx of wealth allowed dynasties like the Han to fund public works, reinforce military strength, and keep the gears of government well oiled. But the road wasn't all silk and spices. It was also fraught with dangers that could destabilize the realm. From banditry to border skirmishes, the challenges of maintaining such a sprawling trade network were as daunting as they were lucrative. Meanwhile, agriculture was the empire's lifeline, the bedrock of its economy. Picture those vast rice paddies and millet fields as the heartbeat of a nation. A good harvest could mean the difference between peace and prosperity, or famine and rebellion. The social contract of the time was simple. The state provided protection and infrastructure, while the farmers delivered food and taxes. But this delicate balance was as finicky as a game of Jenga. One bad harvest, and the whole tower could come crashing down, sparking unrest among the peasantry who could no longer bear the tax burden. Now let's not forget about those lovely little copper coins jingling in the pockets of traders and tax collectors alike. The standardization of currency was a triumph of economic policy, allowing for smoother transactions and a more stable economy. But, spoiler alert, it didn't always work out as planned. Inflation and counterfeiting posed constant threats, undermining confidence in the currency and, by extension, the government itself. It's as if the empire was trying to keep a boat afloat with a few too many leaks, and every counterfeit coin or economic downturn was just another bucket of water seeping in. And let's not gloss over the role of innovation. The introduction of iron tools and the refinement of papermaking were like an economic steroid shot, boosting productivity and efficiency across sectors. But these advancements also came with their own set of challenges. The Great Wall, for example, was a monumental feat of engineering and labour, but its construction drained resources and manpower, creating resentment among those who felt their toil went unrewarded. It's a bit like building a fancy new office tower, while your employees grumble about the lack of a coffee machine. So, how did all these economic factors play out on the political stage? Well, in a word, precariously. A prosperous economy could prop up a dynasty, providing the resources to placate the populace and fend off external threats. But when the economy faltered, so did political stability. Dynastic cycles in China were often punctuated by periods of economic strife, leading to uprisings and the eventual fall of regimes. It's like watching a soap opera where every plot twist involves a tax revolt or a grain shortage. Now, let's fast forward a couple of millennia and see how these ancient economic structures laid the groundwork for modern China. The seeds of today's economic powerhouse were sown in those ancient fields and trade routes. China's emphasis on agricultural productivity, technological innovation, and trade persists to this day. The country's current status as a global manufacturing hub and a leader in technological advancements is a direct descendant of its historical economic strategies. It's like seeing a family resemblance in a long-lost relative, one who just happens to be a world superpower. But what lessons or warnings do these ancient economic tales offer today's global economy? For starters, they remind us of the importance of balance. Economic prosperity must be carefully managed to ensure political stability, lest the scales tip and chaos ensue. Moreover, the history of the Silk Road serves as a cautionary tale about the complexities of global trade. Economic interdependence can bring great wealth, but it also requires careful navigation of geopolitical tensions and cultural clashes. And let's not forget the human element. The workers, farmers, and artisans of ancient China were the unsung heroes of their time, their contributions vital yet often overlooked. As we marvel at modern technological advancements and economic growth, it's crucial to remember the people behind the progress. History teaches us that for every innovation there is hard work and sacrifice, a lesson that remains relevant in today's fast-paced world. Ultimately, the story of ancient China's economy is a rich tapestry of triumphs and trials, one that continues to echo through the ages. As we wrap up our journey, let's leave with a thought. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. The themes of economic balance, innovation, and resilience are timeless, resonating across centuries to remind us of the intricate dance between prosperity and stability. So, as we tuck these historical nuggets away in our mental archives, let's keep our eyes on the present and future, learning from the past to navigate the ever-changing landscape of our own global economy. Before George Washington was the face plastered on the dollar bill, he was just a lanky kid from Virginia. Let's set the scene. It's the early 1700s, and young George is navigating the colonial backwoods with more awkward charm than a teenage sitcom character. Born in 732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia, little George grew up on a plantation, and yes, he was part of the gentry class. But don't imagine Downton Abbey. This was more like Downton Abbey with fewer frills and more muddy boots. Now, about that infamous cherry tree story, I cannot tell a lie, said a mythical young George, after allegedly taking a hatchet to his father's beloved tree. It's a cute story, the type that makes you go aw and want to pat him on the head. But here's the kicker. It's pure fiction, courtesy of Mason Locke Weems, a biographer with a knack for embellishing reality. This tale first appeared in Weems's book in 1806, years after Washington's death, and was likely invented to sell the idea of Washington as a paragon of honesty. Spoiler alert, he was human, not a saint. Fast forward to 1754, and George is no longer a boy with a fictional penchant for tree chopping. He's a 22-year-old with a real penchant for blundering into military messes. Enter Fort Necessity, a name that drips with irony. It was built in a hurry, and that's putting it kindly. George picked a low-lying, swampy spot for the fort, a choice as questionable as putting a tent in a puddle. When the French came knocking, the fort was about as effective as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Washington's men were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, leading to a hasty surrender on July the 3rd, 1754. Lesson learned: location, location, location. The surrender document was another gem. Washington, due to some linguistic shenanigans, or maybe just plain exhaustion, signed a document admitting to the assassination of a French noble, Joseph Coulon de Jumonville, during an earlier skirmish. It was a diplomatic blunder that could have sparked a war. Oh wait, it did. The 7 Years' War, known in the colonies as the French and Indian War, got its fiery start here. Talk about a resume buster. Despite the chaos, Washington's early military escapades were like a trial by fire, one he barely managed to douse. He learned from these missteps, developing a knack for organization and a cool, under-fire demeanor that would later serve him well. It's a testament to his resilience that he emerged from these early goofs with his career not only intact, but on an upward trajectory. By the end of the 1750s, he was a seasoned officer, albeit one with a few embarrassing stories to share over a pint. These formative years weren't just about tactical blunders and mythical trees, though. Young Washington was also navigating the social and political currents of colonial America. He was a surveyor by trade, a job not just about maps and compasses, but also about understanding land and wealth. The experience gave him a front-row seat to the economic underpinnings of his world, where land meant power. Washington's early leadership lessons weren't just about wielding a sword or commanding troops. They were about understanding people, politics, and the precarious dance of power in the colonies. He learned that leadership wasn't just about barking orders, it was about earning respect and adapting when plans went awry. Those early fumbles at Fort Necessity, they were crucibles, forging a leader who would one day steer a fledgling nation through revolution. Through it all, Washington remained a figure of contradictions. A man of action who preferred quiet reflection, a wealthy landowner who struggled with the moral implications of slavery, and an ambitious officer who hesitated to seize power for himself. His life was a balancing act, a series of choices that would shape not just his destiny, but the destiny of a nation. And as we chuckle at his youthful blunders, it's worth remembering, even the greatest leaders start somewhere, often with a stumble. Washington's early blunders were only the prologue to the epic saga of the American Revolutionary War. This war was not just a historical set piece with powdered wigs and dramatic speeches. Oh no, it was an unscripted reality show with unscheduled breaks for chaos and calamity. Now, buckle up as we delve into the chapter where Washington tried to outsmart, outlast, and outmaneuver the British Empire, a task akin to playing chess while blindfolded. Picture 1775, Washington, now in his 40s, is appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army by the Second Continental Congress. They might as well have handed him a broomstick and told him to go fight a dragon. His army was more a ragtag collection of farmers and shopkeepers than a well-oiled military machine. And resources? Think less fully stocked pantry and more barely a can of beans. It was like trying to cook a gourmet meal with a broken stove and a single carrot. Our first stop on this whirlwind tour is the Battle of Boston, where Washington faced the Herculean task of transforming this motley crew into a fighting force. The Siege of Boston stretched from April 1775 to March 1776, and Washington's strategy was as much about psychological warfare as military might. He ordered an elaborate bluff, positioning cannons on Dorchester Heights overlooking the British. Little did they know that these cannons were more bark than bite. Many were just props, and the few that could fire were almost as dangerous to their operators as to the enemy. Come March 1776, the British, recognizing a losing hand, sailed away from Boston, leaving Washington with his first taste of victory. It wasn't a decisive battle, but it was a morale booster for the Continental Army. This was Washington learning on the job, taking what he could get and making the most of it, like MacGyver with a musket. Next, let's talk about New York, or, as it could be called, Washington's masterclass in retreat. In August 1706, the Battle of Long Island saw Washington outnumbered and outmaneuvered by British General William Howe. Washington's forces were scattered, and the situation was teetering on disaster. But here's where Washington's knack for survival kicked in. Through a miraculous overnight evacuation, aided by a dense fog that cloaked their movements, Washington managed to slip across the East River, saving his army from capture. This was less about winning battles and more about keeping the dream alive, sometimes by the skin of his teeth. Fast forward to December 25, 1776, and cue the dramatic music. Washington's army was in tatters, morale was at rock bottom, and enlistments were about to expire. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Enter the iconic crossing of the Delaware River. It was a gamble, a last-ditch effort to turn the tide. Washington led his men across the icy river in a surprise attack on the Hessian forces in Trenton, New Jersey. The result? A much-needed victory that proved Washington's audacity and ability to inspire. This wasn't just a military win, it was a shot in the arm for the American cause. Now, let's not gloss over the fact that the Hessians were caught off guard after a Christmas celebration. Timing is everything, and Washington knew when to seize a moment. His success at Trenton was followed by another victory at Princeton, boosting morale and giving the Continental Congress a reason to celebrate. Washington had bought time and hope, two commodities in short supply. Yet, the harsh reality of war quickly reasserted itself. Enter the winter of 1777-1778 at Valley Forge, a name that conjures up images of frostbitten soldiers and desperation. Washington's army faced starvation, disease, and the unforgiving cold. The logistical ineptitude of the Continental Congress meant that supplies were scarce. The soldiers were as much fighting hunger and hypothermia as they were the British. Washington's leadership was put to the ultimate test, as he struggled to keep his men alive and motivated. Amid this bleak setting walked Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer whose flair for drill and discipline was matched by his colourful personality and creative use of profanity. Von Steuben introduced rigorous training, transforming the bedraggled soldiers into a more cohesive fighting force. Washington's ability to recognize talent and empower leaders like von Steuben was critical in turning the tide at Valley Forge. It was less about being a tactical genius and more about being a great judge of character, a talent that would serve him well. As the frost thawed and the makeshift shelters gave way to spring, the Continental Army emerged stronger, if slightly more tattered. Washington's ability to endure and adapt was the real story here. He wasn't just a commander, he was a survivor, guiding his army through the valley of despair and into the dawn of possibility. The myth of Washington as a flawless military genius is just that, a myth. He was a leader who learned from his mistakes, who knew when to fight and when to retreat. He understood that victory wasn't always about winning battles, but about outlasting the enemy, about keeping the spirit of resistance alive even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As we pause here in our journey through Washington's Revolutionary War exploits, remember, this was a man who faced down the might of an empire with little more than guts and grit. He was a master of improvisation in a world that often seemed hell-bent on chaos. The American Revolution was messy, unpredictable, and fraught with peril. But through it all, Washington remained a steady hand on the tiller, steering the ship through stormy seas toward the uncertain promise of independence. In the next chapter, we'll continue to peel back the layers of Washington's leadership, examining the battles yet to come and the challenges that lay ahead. Stay tuned because this story is far from over, and history has a few more surprises up its sleeve. And so, as we sail away from the stormy seas of revolution, we find ourselves on the calmer yet equally choppy waters of peacetime America. The war was over, and the British had finally packed their bags and left town, leaving George Washington as the rock star of the new nation. But here's the kicker. Washington wasn't exactly thrilled about taking center stage in the political arena. In fact, he was more inclined to retire to Mount Vernon and live out his days with his feet up. Why the reluctance, you ask? Well, for starters, the job of being the first president of the United States wasn't exactly a cushy gig. There was no blueprint, no presidency for dummies manual to guide him. It was like being asked to build a spaceship with nothing but a hammer and some duct tape. Plus, he was dealing with a young nation as temperamental as a toddler at nap time. The idea of navigating that mess wasn't exactly appealing to a guy who had already spent years enduring the chaos of war. But in 1789, the Electoral College delivered a unanimous message: "George, you're it." The whole country was like a crowd at a rock concert, chanting his name and holding up metaphorical lighters. Washington couldn't exactly say no, so he reluctantly traded his peaceful plantation life for the political battlefield of the presidency. Now, let's paint the scene. Washington's election was the first and only time a US president was elected unanimously. Think about that for a second. In today's political climate, getting everyone to agree on pizza toppings is nearly impossible, let alone a president. It's both a testament to Washington's character and the sheer desperation of a nation in need of a steady hand. Once in office, Washington faced the monumental task of setting precedents. There were no previous presidents to emulate, no mentor to call for advice. He was the first man on the moon of American politics. Every decision he made was like stepping into the unknown, with the entire nation watching and taking notes. He had to define the role of the presidency while ensuring the fledgling democracy didn't implode under the weight of its own inexperience. One of Washington's first moves was to establish a cabinet, a novel concept at the time. He surrounded himself with a motley crew of brilliant minds, including Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State and Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. It was like assembling the Avengers but with more quills and less spandex. Hamilton, in particular, was a financial wizard, albeit one with a penchant for creating controversy. Speaking of controversy, let's talk about the Whiskey Rebellion of 1791. This was a classic case of no good deed goes unpunished. To pay off the national debt, Hamilton proposed an excise tax on whiskey. Seems reasonable, right? Except that whiskey was the lifeblood of the frontier economy. It was currency, livelihood, and, let's face it, the frontier version of Netflix, essential for unwinding after a long day of taming the wilderness. The tax hit hardest in western Pennsylvania, where farmers turned their excess grain into whiskey because transporting liquid was far easier than hauling bushels of grain over the Appalachian Mountains. The rebellion was less about whiskey and more about the age-old conflict between taxation and representation. Farmers felt the government was overreaching, and the new nation was suddenly facing its first major internal crisis. Washington, ever the pragmatist, saw the rebellion as a direct challenge to federal authority. His response? A show of force. In 1794, he led a militia of nearly 13,000 troops to quell the uprising, a move that was both decisive and controversial. It was the first and only time a sitting US president personally commanded troops in the field. The rebels dispersed without a fight, and the rebellion fizzled out. But the message was clear. The federal government was not to be trifled with. This whole episode highlighted the growing pains of a young nation. It was the administrative equivalent of a teenager testing boundaries. Washington's handling of the rebellion set a precedent for federal authority, but it also underscored the deep-seated tensions between urban and rural interests, a theme that would replay throughout American history. While domestic policy kept him busy, Washington also had to navigate the treacherous waters of foreign affairs. The French Revolution was in full swing, and the US was caught in the middle like an awkward friend trying to mediate a couple's spat. France expected American support, given their help during the Revolutionary War, but Washington, keen on avoiding another catastrophic conflict, chose neutrality. It was a shrewd move, but one that ruffled feathers both abroad and at home. Washington's presidency was a balancing act on a tightrope of diplomacy and domestic policy. Every decision was a step into the unknown, with the fate of the nation hanging in the balance. He set precedents that would guide future presidents, from the creation of the cabinet to the neutral stance in foreign conflicts. Washington was not just the first president, he was the first problem solver in chief, navigating the chaotic birth of a nation with a steady hand and a weary heart. As his second term came to a close, Washington was more than ready to retire, and in 1796 he delivered his famous farewell address. It was a masterclass in political advice, warning against the dangers of political parties and entangling alliances. It was as if he peered into the future and saw the pitfalls that lay ahead, offering a roadmap to avoid them. Spoiler alert, future leaders didn't always heed his warnings. Washington stepped down from the presidency with a sigh of relief, retreating to Mount Vernon where he hoped to find the peace that had eluded him for so long. But his legacy was far from over. The precedents he set, the decisions he made, and the integrity he maintained would shape the presidency for generations to come. So, as we pause in our historical journey, remember that Washington's story is not just one of military might or political maneuvering. It's the story of a reluctant leader who stepped up when his country needed him most, navigating uncharted waters with the calm determination of a man who had already weathered the storm. Stay tuned, because the story of George Washington is far from over, and there are more tales to tell about the man who became a legend. As Washington settled into retirement, the world outside Mount Vernon was anything but tranquil. The fledgling United States was like a teenager trying to find its way in a world of grown-ups, and those grown-ups weren't exactly setting a good example. Europe was in full-on chaos mode, with the French Revolution turning the continent into a geopolitical blender. Washington, ever the pragmatist, had a foreign policy challenge on his hands that made domestic disputes look like squabbles over the last slice of pie. Let's talk about the Jay Treaty of 1794, a diplomatic maneuver that was as controversial as pineapple on pizza. The backstory is a tale of two nations, the US and Britain, still trying to figure out how to share the same sandbox after the Revolutionary War. British troops were lingering in the Northwest Territory like party guests who didn't know when to leave. Plus, they were impressing American sailors into the Royal Navy, which, spoiler alert, did not impress the Americans. Enter John Jay, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and America's reluctant envoy to Britain. His mission? Negotiate a treaty that would prevent another war and secure economic advantages. The result? A treaty that did neither to anyone's satisfaction. The Jay Treaty got the British to promise to vacate their forts in the northwest, a promise they'd been sitting on for years like a hen on an egg, but it said zilch about impressment and restricted American trade with the British West Indies. In the words of today's social media, it was a diplomatic facepalm. When the treaty hit American shores, it was about as popular as a rainstorm at a barbecue. Critics howled that it sold out American interests, and public opinion was as divided as a Thanksgiving dinner with relatives from different political parties. The Senate, however, ratified it by a whisker-thin margin because, well, peace was better than another round with the British Empire. Washington, who backed the treaty despite the outcry, was suddenly less the beloved father of the country and more the beleaguered dad at a family reunion trying to keep peace between squabbling relatives. His support for the treaty was a masterclass in political courage, or perhaps stubbornness, as he prioritized stability over popularity. And let's be honest, in a world where leaders often chased approval like a dog after a ball, Washington's willingness to take the heat was nothing short of remarkable. Meanwhile, the French were watching all this with raised eyebrows and a sense of betrayal. After all, hadn't they helped the US win its independence? Now, here was Washington shaking hands with their arch-nemesis. France's reaction was like a jilted lover seeing their ex on a date with someone new. They started seizing American ships, and the Franco-American relationship went from, "it's complicated," to, "we need to talk." Washington's stance was crystal clear. Neutrality was the name of the game. Caught between the British lion and the French rooster, Washington chose not to pick sides. He issued the Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793, a document that declared the United States as Switzerland before Switzerland was cool. This wasn't just a strategic move, It was Washington's way of keeping the young nation focused on growth instead of getting dragged into Europe's endless game of risk. Of course, neutrality was easier said than done. Washington's policies sparked debates more heated than a July afternoon. The Federalists, led by Hamilton, were pro-British, while the Jeffersonian Republicans were pro-French. It was like a geopolitical version of Team Edward versus not Maystay, Team Jacob, with the stakes a bit higher than teenage romance. Washington, caught in the middle, had to navigate these turbulent waters with all the skill of a sailor threading a needle in a hurricane. As his presidency wound down, Washington penned his farewell address, a political mic drop if there ever was one. The address wasn't delivered as a speech, but published in newspapers, ensuring it reached the masses. It was like Washington's version of a YouTube vlog, offering wisdom for the ages with a dash of stern advice. In it, he warned against political parties, those pesky factions that threatened national unity. He must have had a crystal ball, because his cautionary words sound eerily prescient today. He also advised against entangling alliances, urging America to steer clear of foreign conflicts. Washington was basically saying, "Keep it simple, folks." The farewell address was Washington's final attempt to impart his vision of a united, independent nation, free from the divisive politics and foreign entanglements that could unravel its hard-won freedom. It was a blueprint for future generations, though, as history shows, not everyone read the instructions. Washington stepped down in 1797, finally free to return to Mount Vernon, where he hoped to enjoy a quieter life. But his legacy was anything but quiet. The precedents he set, from neutrality in foreign policy to the peaceful transfer of power, left an indelible mark on the presidency and the nation. Washington was more than a leader. He was the reluctant architect of a new world, a man who understood the power of restraint and the importance of vision. As we look back, it's clear. The story of George Washington is not just one of epic battles and presidential firsts, it's the story of a man who helped shape a nation, one tough decision at a time. And while his era comes to a close, the saga of America was just beginning, with new challenges and triumphs on the horizon. As George Washington finally hung up his presidential boots and returned to Mount Vernon in 1797, you might think he was ready to kick back, sip some lemonade, and watch the Potomac flow by. But this was Washington we're talking about, a man who seemed to attract responsibility like a magnet in a paperclip factory. His return to civilian life was anything but a quiet retreat. Instead, it was a mix of personal reflection, estate management, and, of course, dealing with the constant stream of visitors who just couldn't resist dropping by to see the man himself. Let's set the stage at Mount Vernon. Washington's estate was a sprawling 8,000 acres, not some quaint countryside villa. Running this operation was no small feat. It was like managing a small town, complete with its own economy. Agriculture was the backbone, with wheat, corn, and other crops giving life to the plantation. And let's not forget the distillery, which by 1799 was churning out about 11,000 gallons of whiskey annually. Talk about a side hustle. This was Washington the businessman, leveraging his land to keep the estate and his legacy afloat. Despite his meticulous management, Washington's finances weren't exactly Scrooge McDuck level. The cost of maintaining Mount Vernon was hefty, and he operated in the red more often than he'd like. Here was a man who'd led a nation, but still wrestled with the same financial headaches that plague us all. It's a humbling reminder that even founding fathers had to balance the books. As for his health, well, it wasn't the best. Washington was plagued by dental issues that were less about wooden teeth and more about a series of painful dentures made from materials like human teeth, ivory, and even lead. The wooden teeth myth? A fabrication as false as a $3 bill. The truth was far grimmer and served as a testament to the primitive state of dentistry in the 18th century. Yet, the image of Washington with wooden teeth endures, a quirky footnote in the annals of history that adds a touch of humanity to the marble busts. During these final years, Washington also wrestled with his views on slavery. Though he owned over 300 enslaved people at Mount Vernon, he became increasingly uneasy with the institution. It was a moral conflict that gnawed at him, much like the dental issues. In a move that was both progressive and pragmatic for his time, Washington's will stipulated that his slaves be freed upon his wife's death. It was a significant gesture, albeit one that wouldn't be fully realized in his lifetime. The dichotomy between his actions and his beliefs is a stark reminder of the complexities of his character and the era's social fabric. Now, about those visitors. Washington's Mount Vernon was the 18th century equivalent of a celebrity hotspot. Everyone from dignitaries to distant relatives felt compelled to visit, each seeking a moment with the man who had become a living legend. Imagine the constant parade of guests, like a never-ending open house. For Washington, this was both a blessing and a burden. He cherished the friendships but longed for the solitude that seemed to always elude him. Despite the bustle, Washington found time for reflection, contemplating the young nation's future. His correspondence from this period reveals a man deeply invested in the legacy he helped to create. He worried about political divisions, the very thing he'd warned against in his farewell address. But he also saw the potential of America, a nation that was finding its identity and its place on the world stage. Washington's final act came suddenly. In December 1799, a severe throat infection, likely a case of bacterial epiglottitis, took hold. Despite the best efforts of doctors, who employed the era's go-to treatment of bloodletting, a practice as effective as putting a band-aid on a broken arm, Washington succumbed on December 14, 1799. He was 67 years old. His death was a national event, prompting mourning from citizens who saw him as the father of their country. In death, Washington became even larger than life. The myths and legends that surrounded him grew, fueled by a nation eager to craft a narrative of heroism and virtue. The cherry tree story and the wooden teeth myth became part of this tapestry, charming anecdotes that painted him as both relatable and exceptional. They weren't just tales. They were tools to shape the image of a leader who was as monumental as he was mortal. Washington's legacy is a kaleidoscope of contradictions and achievements. He was a man who wielded immense power yet relinquished it willingly, setting a precedent for peaceful transitions that would define American democracy. He was a slave owner who took steps, however limited, toward emancipation. He was a military leader who understood the cost of war and a president who laid the foundation for a new government. His life was a testament to the complexities of leadership, where decisions were seldom clear-cut and principles were often tested by reality. As we close the chapter on Washington's story, it's tempting to view him through the rosy lens of nostalgia, but to truly understand his impact, we must embrace both the myth and the reality. Washington was no demigod. He was a man navigating the tumult of his times with a vision that often transcended them. His legacy is not just in monuments or currency, but in the enduring principles of governance and leadership that continue to guide the nation he helped forge. In the end, Washington wasn't just the first president. He was the first to grapple with the challenges of leadership in a fledgling democracy. His life was a series of choices that, for better or worse, shaped the trajectory of a nation. As we remember him, let's cherish the myth, but never forget the man. For it is in the blend of legend and reality that we find the true measure of George Washington's legacy. In the grand tapestry of the Tudor dynasty, Elizabeth stands out like a peacock in a henhouse, but her early years were anything but regal. Born on September 7, 1533, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth entered a world where the family motto might as well have been, "Off with their heads." Seriously, in the House of Tudor, beheading was practically a hobby. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, famously lost her head when Elizabeth was just 2 years old, courtesy of her father's wandering eye and the sharp edge of a sword. Talk about a rough start. Now, Henry VIII was not your average dad. He was like someone who loves collecting cars but instead collected wives. 6, to be exact. And as if chopping off the heads of his wives wasn't enough drama, he also had a penchant for flamboyant spending that would make a modern-day shopaholic blush. The man dropped cash like it was going out of style, funding everything from lavish banquets to military campaigns that often ended in spectacular failure. The Field of the Cloth of Gold, a 1520 summit with France, cost him approximately $15,000 today. That's around $5 million. Henry's financial recklessness meant that by the time Elizabeth came into power, the treasury was emptier than a pub on Good Friday. Growing up amidst this chaos, Elizabeth had to learn early on how to navigate a world where political alliances shifted faster than the English weather. She mastered the art of survival, a skill that would serve her well throughout her reign. In a court rife with intrigue and betrayal, she quickly became adept at reading the room, or, more accurately, the throne room. One of her early lessons likely came courtesy of her half-sister, Mary I, who, upon ascending the throne, promptly had Elizabeth imprisoned in the Tower of London. Not exactly a sisterly sleepover, but it taught Elizabeth the value of keeping her friends close and her enemies closer, which in Tudor terms meant just about everyone. Elizabeth was also a keen observer of her father's economic disasters. She watched as Henry's lavish lifestyle crumbled under its own weight, leaving behind a kingdom as financially stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The man had more bling than a modern rapper, with a wardrobe that included over 2,000 pieces of clothing. But Elizabeth, the savvy daughter she was, took notes. She saw firsthand the dangers of fiscal irresponsibility and vowed to steer clear of financial ruin when her turn came. Unlike Daddy Dearest, Elizabeth understood the importance of managing resources wisely, a lesson she would implement with her own brand of frugality and political cunning. Speaking of financial acumen, Elizabeth's ability to stretch a coin became legendary. She turned penny pinching into a fine art, balancing the budget like a tightrope walker over the Thames. Her early years taught her that every penny mattered, a principle she applied to her reign with ruthless efficiency. Under Elizabeth, England's economy saw a turnaround, moving from bankruptcy towards a robust trade system that laid the groundwork for the future British Empire. She might not have had Henry's flair for extravagance, but she sure knew how to keep the kingdom afloat. Despite the tumult and the guillotine-like atmosphere at home, Elizabeth had a knack for thriving in adversity. Her education was rigorous, with a curriculum that covered Latin, Greek, French, Italian, and the works of classical philosophers. She was tutored by some of the era's finest minds, including Roger Ascham, who praised her intellect and even her handwriting, which he claimed was more beautiful than any man's. Here was a woman ahead of her time, capable of holding her own in a man's world, wielding her education like a sword, sharp and ready for the challenges ahead. Elizabeth's childhood was less about fairy tales and more about survival in a court where loyalty was as fleeting as a summer's day in England. Yet the absurdity of her upbringing prepared her for the throne in a way that no coronation ceremony ever could. She learned strategy from watching the political chess games of those around her, understanding the importance of alliances and the power of perception. Even at a young age, she possessed a shrewdness that would later define her reign, making her one of the most formidable rulers in history. As she tiptoed through the minefield of Tudor politics, Elizabeth developed a flair for the dramatic, a skill that would prove invaluable. She knew how to use her image to her advantage, portraying herself as the Virgin Queen married to her country. This was as much a political maneuver as it was a personal choice, allowing her to maintain power without the encumbrance of a husband who might try to usurp her authority. Her early years, fraught with danger and deception, honed her instincts and prepared her to rule with a blend of charm, wit, and an iron will. In a world where the stakes were life and death, Elizabeth's early life was a crash course in monarchy and survival. From the shadows of the Tower to the glittering halls of power, she emerged not just as a survivor, but as a ruler who would change the course of history. Her journey from the turbulence of her childhood to the throne of England is a testament to her resilience and cunning, a saga of a young girl who learned to play the game better than anyone else in the room. And play it she did, with a flair that would have made even her father proud had he stuck around long enough to see it. Elizabeth's journey to the throne was more like a high-stakes chess game than a fairy tale, with every move watched and counted by players hungry for power. After Mary's death in 1558, the English throne was up for grabs, and Elizabeth, with her blend of cunning and charm, knew just how to seize the opportunity. She was no stranger to the chaos of court life, where alliances were as fickle as English sunshine and betrayal lurked around every corner. The political landscape Elizabeth navigated was a veritable minefield. England was a country fractured by religious turmoil, with Protestants and Catholics eyeing each other like cats in a room full of rocking chairs. Elizabeth, ever the pragmatist, had a foot in both camps. She was Protestant by upbringing and conviction, but she understood the importance of appeasing Catholic factions that were as numerous as jelly beans at a toddler's birthday party. Her ascent was no simple coronation. It was a balancing act on a tightrope, with the stakes as high as they could get. Her half-sister Mary I had left a legacy of religious persecution and political instability that would have made even Machiavelli shudder. When Mary died, Elizabeth didn't just inherit a crown, she inherited a powder keg. But Elizabeth was no ordinary ruler. She was a strategist with the soul of a gambler, ready to roll the dice and place her bets on the future of England. Her first move? Assembling a team of political heavyweights who could help her navigate the treacherous waters of Tudor politics. She relied on the likes of William Cecil, later Lord Burghley, a man whose political acumen was as sharp as a butcher's knife. Cecil was her chief adviser, a sort of Tudor-era consigliere, helping to craft policies that would stabilise her reign and bolster England's standing on the global stage. Together they worked to establish a religious settlement that would appease both Protestant and Catholic subjects, an act of political genius or sheer luck, depending on how you look at it. The 1559 Act of Supremacy and Act of Uniformity were their brainchildren, re-establishing the Church of England's independence from Rome and crafting a middle path in religious practice. Elizabeth's mastery extended beyond politics into the realm of personal diplomacy, particularly in her use of marriage proposals as a weapon of state. You see, back in the day, marriage was less about love and more about land, money, and power. Think less Romeo and Juliet, and more strategic merger and acquisition. Elizabeth, though, was the original master of playing hard to get. She received countless proposals from European princes and dukes, but she wielded these offers like a poker player with an unbeatable hand. Take, for instance, the prolonged courtship with Philip II of Spain, who was more persistent than a telemarketer during dinner. Elizabeth entertained his courtship with the skill of a diplomat, using the possibility of marriage to Spain as leverage in negotiations. Meanwhile, she flirted with France through the Duke of Anjou, a relationship that had all the promise of a grand romance novel, but was, in reality, a political dance designed to keep France from getting too cozy with Spain. Elizabeth's marriage strategies were like a soap opera with a cast of thousands, each episode ending with her retaining her autonomy and England's strategic advantage. And speaking of strategic advantages, Elizabeth's public persona was as finely crafted as a Shakespearean sonnet. The myth of the Virgin Queen wasn't just a catchy nickname, it was a political masterstroke. By presenting herself as married to her country, Elizabeth was able to maintain control over her court and her kingdom without the interference of a husband. In an era where kings routinely sidelined their queens, this was nothing short of revolutionary. She turned her singleness into a symbol of purity and commitment to her nation, a move that not only solidified her image but also ensured that her authority remained unchallenged. Historians have long debated the truth behind the Virgin Queen myth. While some suggest she remained celibate for political reasons, others whisper of clandestine romances that, if true, would make for scandalous tabloid headlines even today. What is certain, though, is that Elizabeth understood the power of narrative. She knew that her virginity was a valuable piece of propaganda, a symbol that rallied her subjects and confounded her enemies. It was a narrative that gave her the power of a deity in a world dominated by men. As Elizabeth ascended to the throne and established her reign, she left behind the debris of her tumultuous childhood and the shadows of the Tower. She emerged as a ruler who could deftly handle the political chessboard, utilizing alliances and betrayals like a seasoned maestro conducting a symphony of intrigue. Her reign was a testament to her resilience, shrewdness, and the artful dodging of matrimonial snares. Elizabeth's journey was far from over, and as she took her place as the ruler of England, she was ready to lead a nation into what would become one of its most celebrated eras. Elizabeth's strategic use of marriage proposals and her carefully crafted image as the Virgin Queen were just the opening moves in a long game of thrones. Her ascent was marked by a series of bold decisions, savvy alliances, and a keen understanding of the power of perception. She knew that in the game of politics the ability to control the narrative was as crucial as any treaty or military alliance. As we continue to explore her reign, we'll see how these early decisions laid the groundwork for the Elizabethan Golden Age, a period of cultural flourishing and political stability that would define her legacy. But that's a story for another day, as Elizabeth's reign was just beginning and the world was about to see what true leadership looked like. The stage was set for Elizabeth to embark on her most daring economic strategies, and boy, did she have some tricks up her ruffled sleeve. As if being a female monarch in a man's world wasn't enough, she had to tackle the financial mess left by her predecessors. Picture England as a broke college student with caviar dreams but a ramen budget. Elizabeth needed gold, and not just the kind found in fairy tales. She needed cold, hard cash to not only stabilize but also elevate her kingdom on the global stage. Enter the Sea Dogs, England's unofficial pirates with royal winks and nods. These were not your run-of-the-mill swashbucklers. They were state-sanctioned privateers like Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Hawkins, who were essentially given hall passes to loot Spanish treasure ships. Talk about bending the rules. Elizabeth's audacious approach saw these maritime mavericks not only filling her coffers, but also poking the Spanish bear, a strategy that could have been a recipe for disaster, but instead became a masterstroke. Let's talk specifics. Drake's most famous haul was the capture of the Spanish galleon Nuestra Señora de la Concepción in 1579. This wasn't just any ship, it was a floating treasure chest laden with an estimated 600,000 worth of gold, silver and jewels. To put that in perspective, that's around 100 million in today's money, enough to make even Elon Musk do a double take. Elizabeth got a hefty cut, which was a clever way to boost the royal treasury without resorting to the dreaded tax hikes that made monarchs about as popular as a skunk at a garden party. But it wasn't just about plundering Spanish ships. Elizabeth had her eye on trade routes and economic expansion like a hawk on prey. The East India Company, founded in 1600, was her brainchild, aimed at cracking open the markets of the East like a nutcracker on Christmas. This company would go on to revolutionize trade, establishing a British presence in India and setting the stage for the empire's global dominance. It was the kind of forward-thinking move that made her reign a golden age, even if the gold occasionally came from less than noble origins. Now, let's debunk some myths while we're at it. Elizabeth's reign is often romanticized as a period of unending prosperity. Sure, her economic strategies were bold and often brilliant, but they were also a high-wire act with no safety net. The notion that she single-handedly turned England into a powerhouse is a bit of a fairy tale. Her success relied heavily on the talents and risks of others, and she wasn't above playing them against each other like a game of chess where everyone else was a pawn. Moreover, the wealth from privateering was a double-edged sword. It filled royal coffers, but also provoked Spain into launching the Spanish Armada in 1588, a massive fleet that sought to crush England under its naval might. Elizabeth's response? Well, she rallied her troops with a speech at Tilbury that would have made any motivational speaker proud. She declared she had the heart and stomach of a king, and even though the Armada was eventually defeated more by storms than by England's naval prowess, it was her leadership and ability to inspire that became the stuff of legend. The reality was a bit more complicated, with luck playing as big a role as strategy. But hey, history loves a good yarn, and Elizabeth knew how to spin one. The Virgin Queen also had to navigate the labyrinth of traditional taxation. She wasn't about to go all Henry VIII and impose heavy taxes that would leave her subjects grumbling like a bunch of teenagers asked to clean their rooms. Instead, Elizabeth was adept at working within the limits of her resources. She implemented frugal spending policies, reducing the royal household expenses and making sure every pound was stretched further than a yoga instructor in a flexibility contest. Her fiscal prudence was legendary, a stark contrast to her father's spendthrift ways, and it set a precedent for future monarchs who realized that staying solvent was as crucial as staying sovereign. Elizabeth's economic strategies were not just about avoiding financial ruin. They were about positioning England as a player on the global stage. She understood that wealth wasn't just about hoarding gold, but about leveraging influence and power. Her reign saw the beginning of England's transformation into a maritime powerhouse, a journey that would eventually lead to the British Empire's zenith in the centuries to come. It was a legacy built not just on treasure, but on trade, diplomacy, and the occasional strategic skirmish. So, while the legend of Elizabeth paints her as the wise, benevolent monarch steering her nation to glory, the reality involved a lot of calculated risks, a bit of piracy, and more than a few sleepless nights. She was a ruler who understood that sometimes you have to play the game by your own rules, even if it means bending them until they almost break. Her economic strategies were as bold and colourful as the tapestries that adorned her court, woven together with threads of ambition, innovation, and a touch of audacity. As we continue to explore the reign of this formidable queen, Remember that Elizabeth's true genius lay in her ability to navigate the complexities of her time with a mix of caution and daring. She was a monarch who played on the edge, balancing tradition and innovation like a tightrope walker with nerves of steel. And in doing so, she left a legacy that would reverberate through history, proving that sometimes the best way to win the game is to change its rules entirely. There's still more to unravel about the economic tapestry of Elizabeth's reign, so stay tuned for the next chapter in this royal saga. Speaking of playing by your own rules, Elizabeth I was about to face the ultimate test of her leadership, the Spanish Armada of 1588. Now, in the 16th century, naval warfare was like a game of chess played on a stormy sea with pieces that occasionally sank. Spain's Philip II, ever so slightly miffed by England's piratical tendencies and Protestant stance, decided it was time to teach these upstart islanders a lesson. Philip envisioned an invasion fleet so formidable that it would make Poseidon himself think twice before setting out for a swim. The Armada was no small fry. We're talking about 130 ships, 8,000 sailors, and 18,000 soldiers. A floating force so large it was practically a mobile city. Think of it as the 16th century equivalent of an aircraft carrier group, but with more cannons and fewer aircraft. Philip II had thrown down the gauntlet, and Elizabeth had to pick it up without breaking a sweat or the bank. First up, logistics. Raising a defence wasn't just about rallying the troops, it required pounds, shillings, and plenty of pence. Elizabeth's government scoured the kingdom to muster a fleet capable of facing the Spanish behemoth. This meant scraping together about 200 ships. While some of these were royal vessels, many others were private ships conscripted into service. Think Uber, but for a naval battle. And the cost? It was a princely sum, estimated at around 100,000, which, let's just say, could buy you a few castles and still leave change for a fleet of carriages. Then there was the small matter of assembling an army. Unlike today's professional forces, Elizabeth had to rely on militias and volunteers, many of whom had about as much combat experience as a medieval librarian. Yet the Queen knew how to rally her subjects. Her famous speech at Tilbury, delivered in July 1588, was an absolute masterclass in morale-boosting rhetoric. Clad in armour, she declared, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." This wasn't just a motivational speech, it was a piece of theatre worthy of the globe, and it worked like a charm. England's defenders were fired up, ready to face the Spanish onslaught with a courage that belied their numbers and experience. Now, let's talk strategy. Elizabeth's advisers, including the seasoned Admiral Lord Howard of Effingham and clever sea dog Sir Francis Drake, had to outthink a force that outgunned them. The English plan relied on speed and manoeuvrability. Their ships were smaller, faster, and more agile than the towering Spanish galleons. These weren't just ships, they were the sports cars of the sea, zipping around like caffeinated squirrels at the park. Despite all the planning, though, the real MVP of this naval showdown turned out to be Mother Nature herself. The Spanish Armada, already beset by poor planning and logistical hiccups, faced the wrath of the English Channel's notoriously fickle weather. Fierce storms scattered the Spanish fleet, turning their formation into a maritime version of a Jackson Pollock painting. The English capitalized on this chaos, employing tactics that included fireships, vessels set ablaze, and sent drifting into the enemy's midst. It was a strategy that, while risky, paid off handsomely. So, did careful planning win the day? Or was it sheer luck? The answer, as is often the case in history, is a bit of both. Elizabeth's leadership and the ingenuity of her commanders were crucial, but without those timely squalls, things might have played out differently. It's a reminder that history often hinges on the unpredictable whims of fate, a fact that Elizabeth, with her penchant for theatre, surely appreciated. In the aftermath, England found itself basking in the glow of an unexpected victory. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was celebrated as a divine endorsement of Elizabeth's reign, and the Queen herself became a living legend. Her image as the indomitable Virgin Queen, defender of the realm, was cemented in public consciousness. This wasn't just a military triumph, it was a PR coup of epic proportions. Myth and reality, however, are rarely so neatly aligned. The victory over the Armada didn't suddenly transform England into the dominant naval power. It was more like a scrappy underdog's unexpected win against a heavyweight champion. Sure, it boosted national morale and prestige, but England's navy still had a long way to go before ruling the waves. The notion that the defeat of the Armada instantly made England a superpower is as much myth as it is history. Nevertheless, it set the stage for future expansion and was a crucial stepping stone on the path to naval dominance. Elizabeth's handling of the Armada also underscores her knack for blending charisma with propaganda. Her speeches and public appearances were carefully crafted to maintain morale and reinforce her image as a strong, divinely sanctioned ruler. In a time before Twitter and press conferences, Elizabeth understood the power of a well-delivered speech and an iconic image. Her ability to inspire her people was as vital to her success as any military maneuver or economic policy. In the end, the saga of the Spanish Armada is a testament to Elizabeth's leadership and England's resilience. It's a story of courage, strategy, and, yes, a bit of good old-fashioned luck. It's also a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, sometimes the most potent weapon is not a sword or a ship, but the ability to rally people around a common cause. As we sail onward in our exploration of Elizabeth's reign, remember that while the legend of the Virgin Queen is grand, the reality is even more fascinating. A tale of a ruler who dared to defy convention and, in doing so, changed the course of history. Stay tuned, because the winds of Elizabeth's story are far from calm, and there's more to uncover on this remarkable voyage. As Elizabeth's reign sailed through the stormy seas of history, it became clear that her legacy was as multifaceted as a diamond, which, for the record, she had a notable fondness for. Now, before we get too misty-eyed about the Gloriana image, this iconic, unyielding Virgin Queen, we have to take a magnifying glass to both the shimmer and the tarnish of her era. She was a monarch whose rule was as complex as a Shakespearean plot, and just as filled with twists, turns, and the occasional tragic hero. Let's start with the dazzling bits. Elizabeth first turned England into a rising star on the European stage, a feat not unlike turning a scrappy garage band into a chart-topping phenomenon. Her deft handling of international politics, particularly her ability to keep England out of costly continental wars, was an act of tightrope walking that would make even the flying Wallendas look twice. She maintained England's sovereignty through a blend of diplomacy and occasional sabre-rattling, mastering the art of soft power before the term even entered the lexicon. Under her reign, the arts flourished like never before. This period wasn't just marked by political and economic manoeuvring, it was the Shakespearean era, a cultural renaissance that saw the likes of the bard himself putting quill to parchment. Elizabeth's court became a cultural beacon, attracting poets, playwrights, and musicians in droves. But here's the kicker. While the Elizabethan age is often hailed as a golden era of culture, it was also a time when the average person was more likely to worry about their next meal than the latest play. The gap between the haves and have-nots was as wide as the Thames at high tide. Economically, Elizabeth's strategies laid the groundwork for what would become the British Empire. The establishment of the East India Company in 1600 was a bold move, one that signalled England's intent to play in the big leagues of global trade. While it didn't instantly transform England into a global juggernaut, it was the first step on a long and winding road that would eventually see the sun never setting on the British Empire. And yet, for all the grandeur, this expansion was rooted in exploitation and colonialism, a legacy that history would later scrutinize with a more critical eye. Now, let's dim the lights a bit and talk about the shadows. The romanticized image of Elizabeth's reign often glosses over the harsher realities of her policies. Her administration was marked by severe measures against dissent, particularly religious dissent. The execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587 was a brutal reminder of Elizabeth's willingness to eliminate threats to her power. It was a move that some hailed as necessary for national security, while others saw it as the ruthless elimination of a rival. The truth? Probably a bit of both. Her religious policies, while aimed at creating a middle ground between Catholics and Protestants, often left both sides dissatisfied. The Elizabethan religious settlement of 1559 was a calculated compromise, one that kept England from descending into the religious wars that plagued the continent. However, it also led to the persecution of Catholics and the harsh treatment of nonconformists, revealing the iron fist beneath the velvet glove. Elizabeth's domestic policies did not always favour the common folk. While she was adept at managing the nobility and balancing the national budget, the average Elizabethan citizen still faced a life of hardship. The Poor Laws, introduced during her reign, were an attempt to address the growing issue of poverty, but they were more of a band-aid than a cure. The laws aimed to provide relief for the destitute, but they also reinforced a system that stigmatized poverty, setting a precedent for future social policies. And let's not forget the personal myth-making. The image of the Virgin Queen, while politically savvy, was also a piece of propaganda that veiled the more personal aspects of her reign. Elizabeth was a master of image control, using her singleness as a symbol of her devotion to her country. Yet, this narrative of celibacy and purity was as much about controlling the political narrative as it was about personal choice. The reality? Elizabeth was a woman of her time, navigating a patriarchal society with the tools available to her, wit, charm, and the occasional strategic fib. In the end, Elizabeth's reign was a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, brilliance, and the occasional moral compromise. Her legacy is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of colours, some vibrant, others muted, all intertwining to create the story of a ruler who defied convention and, in doing so, left an indelible mark on the world. As a leader, Elizabeth set a precedent for future monarchs, demonstrating that charisma and cunning could be as powerful as armies and fleets. Her reign was a masterclass in the art of governance, showing that sometimes the best way to lead is to rewrite the rules entirely. She was a queen who understood the power of narrative, both in politics and in history, crafting a legacy that would endure long after the final curtain fell on her life. So, as we bid adieu to Elizabeth I, let's remember her not just as the mythic Virgin Queen, but as a complex, multifaceted ruler whose blend of strategy, style, and substance changed the course of history. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience and intellect in the face of adversity, a tale as rich and layered as the history she helped shape. And that, dear listeners, is the real legacy of Elizabeth I, an enduring reminder that sometimes, in the Game of Thrones, the most formidable players are those who dare to change the game itself.